Hello ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. With TBC confirmed, it's about time we did a little bit of a class update. Let's take a look back at each class in the Burning Crusade, their performance overall, and hopefully help you make your choice moving forwards. We will be looking at what's new in terms of talents and abilities, leveling, PvE, who's the new king of the meta, PvP has much changed, and tier sets which actually exist for every specialization now. And through this I hope to answer, is your class any better now? Burst through the portal, the hottest healer on the market, the most mobile class in the game, and the tank that puts the word thick into dick, the Druid. Well, we have to begin this somewhere, and I'm going for the Druid. Why Druid? I think out of every class, if I had to give some kind of most improved award out, it's gonna go to our furry friends. The love this class got from Blizzard moving from Classic to the Burning Crusade is nothing short of enormous. No longer are you prevented from using your hots because of world buffs, no longer are you in the shadow of warriors as a tank, no longer are the DPS specs totally memed on, both bringing very valuable assets to your raid team. I think I want to start by going over a few things when I looked at the Druid back during the Was It Any Good Though videos, being that Druids are the true embodiment of a jack of all trade, master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one. Well in WoW unfortunately this doesn't really tend to be the case. Being specifically proficient in one role is more valuable the vast majority of the time. This is why you have raid groups or arena teams. It's an MMO and it's often a group-wide effort. That flexibility your class boasts can really rarely be flexed. Aside from class-specific utility, of course, your Resto Druid in Classic wasn't about to hop into Cat and do anything meaningful, nor do any damage due to stacking bonus healing. Your Boomkin shifting into Burr to Taunt is missing the huge bonus Burrs get from armor scaling, as you're probably wearing a lot of cloth gear. The hybrid tax was hitting your Vault of Utility a little bit too hard. This was the idea that as your class could perform in multiple roles, that it could not be as strong as a class that could only do one, as it would risk only one class being viable for that role, which definitely didn't happen in Classic at all. So in TBC, whilst keeping much of their own unique utility, Druid's toolkit expanded greatly and each of their specializations started to shine on their own, not suffer as a result of the overall class identity. Okay, with that in mind, let's get into this. So what is new for Druid? A lot, like a really huge amount. I'll go over what's new baseline, and then we can get into the spec-specific stuff when we cover that soon, or I'll just end up repeating myself. Baseline, Druid's got some spells which have become iconic with the class over the years. Cyclone, an extremely versatile and powerful tool, which we can talk more about mostly for PvP. Lacerate for Burrs, a stacking bleed with a threat modifier, kind of like the feral equivalent to Sunder Armor in that it's stacked to 5. Whilst doing minor damage, it's just another button to press and make your rotation a bit more interesting. Main for Cats, this new finishing move uses your combo points for an incapacitate effect. Unlike Gouge from Rogues though, it doesn't break from damage over time, only direct damage, so it can be a strong setup ability for a CC chain or a follow-up Cyclone. Druids got flying, of course. They can train flying for cheap at their class trainers as early as level 68, making them the ideal candidates for gatherers in the open world, and kind of impossible to take out in PvP unless you can stun lock them down. In a later patch, the epic flying variant was introduced through a long quest line. This wasn't 3 though, and you had to pay up the 5k for master flying before you could make a start on it, but it was well worth it, giving some nice idols, access to Anzu in Sethek Halls who can drop the Ravenlord, and an instant cast 280% flying speed. Very good. And for Restoration, Life Bloom, a hot that can be stacked up to 3 times in TBC, and when it's expired or is dispelled, it gives a strong instant burst of healing, great for targets taking consistent damage like tanks, and offers dispel protection for other hots in PvP. Leveling wise, I'll keep it pretty short because there is a lot to talk about for the rest of the video. What made Druids good in Classic for leveling continues to make them good in TBC too. Feral will still be your go-to, and whilst Moonkin does get a lot of help from the talent reworks, a lot of those talents are reliant on item scaling at endgame, and as a fresh 60, or especially before that, you just aren't going to be seeing the benefits of them nearly as much. As a geared 60 Resto Druid though, it'll be boom your bus really, well, outside of dungeons that is. There is some hybrid PvP spec called Restokin I'll talk about later, which could be interesting for this actually. Despite getting flying early as well, Outland wasn't by and large designed with a notion that you will be flying, as we've seen with previous retail expansions. Sure, it can help with some verticality at times, but the game doesn't expect you to have flying until level 70. It's just a little bit of a Druid bonus. So let's talk PvE and we'll get a bit more into the specializations. As with every Druid video, there are 4 specs, so I'll do my best to cover everything. Let's start with the one I bet most people are curious about how it's changed, Boomkin. So in Classic, Boomies suffer from just about everything that can go wrong with a caster class. They have poor mana management, no hit talents, reliant on crit RNG to do damage. They can't use their dots because of the debuff cap, which is now 40 in TBC. They compete with other casters for BIS gear, they don't have a dedicated tier set, and well, their damage just isn't very good even if the stars align, quite literally, and you get very lucky. So you'll be glad to know the vast majority of this changes. Will you be top of the meters? Will people be saying we need more Boomkins for this raid? Will you be getting funneled all the top loot as a priority? No. Whilst the spec is massively improved, it's still more utility focused and middle of the road in damage. Spec-wise, Barkskin gets a very nice little rework to make it considerably better. Now 20% of all damage taken is reduced, the attack speed slow from Classic is gone, and it's usable whilst CC'd, all that on a 1-minute cooldown, one of the main reasons Druids are so good in PvP. Insect swarms move over from the resto tree to balance so they can actually cast it now. This also reduces their target's chance to hit by 2%. Here's an idea of what a PvE raid focus build would look like. A lot of talents have been consolidated, Starlight Wrath for casting speed, Celestial Focus for more PvP utility, Balance of Power is a nice hit chance talent which the Druids very much needed, Dream State, Lunar Guidance and Moonglow are all there to address scaling issues that the Boomkin had in Classic, though these can still crop up early on into the expansion. Improved Fairy Fire. If you thought melee started ringing when they didn't see a Fairy Fire up in Classic for 0.5 seconds, well, let's turn it up to 11 with this talent now providing a 3% ranged and melee hit chance on it, which is an extremely powerful debuff your whole raid can benefit from. You will definitely want to have this. Moonkin form got big buffs, 400% armor, which is now one beefy chicken boy, the crit aura buffed up from 3 to 5%, and for some reason you now get attack power and a chance to restore mana on melee, which I guess someone at Blizzard liked the idea you go and then just start smacking people about with your tendy arms, I don't know. Force of Nature not taken though? Well, see, Blizzard have this habit of giving Moonkin spells that are hard to control. Do you remember the early versions of Starfall? And Force of Nature just kind of go and do their own thing. There isn't a pet bar for them, so there could be a risk to chain pull or just cause general headaches. Maybe there will be some big brain who figures out how to get them to work through macros, which did happen with totems in Classic for a while. So you can see here why Boomy is a great class to bring. On top of Innovate, Rebirth, off heals, they now have a better spell crit aura, they reduce enemies' chance to hit and provide melee hit themselves. The thing is, and this will be the case with quite a few specs, you don't really need to bring more than one of them to get all the good stuff they bring. Utility spec, right? And there are quite a few we need one of these type specs in the game now. I can say the demand for laser chickens in your raid will definitely be there though in TBC. Moving on though, Feral DPS, the talent tree that packs enough points and punch to get 2 specializations out of it. How are the kitty cats looking over the other side of the Dark Portal? Well, similar to Classic in some ways, a specialization that needs a bit of extra effort to get the most out of it. Remember Wolf's Head Helm and power shifting? Yep, that is still a thing. The real simple explanation of this item combined with a Fiora talent, an exit and re-entering cat form between energy ticks is superior to just letting your energy regenerate naturally, at the expense of being a lot more mana intensive and requiring you to get that rhythm down. What about manual crowd pummeler though? Well, good news there at least. The on-use changed to 500 haste rating in TBC, whereas new toys that Ferals get, so this goes for tanks too, exceed what this weapon can offer, so Ferals, rejoice, your days of Nomagun are officially over. Here is an example DPS spec. I've left 5 talent points out from Improved Mark of the Wild. Both your Boomies and Resto Druid will always have this talented, so you should be able to get out of the buff rotation. As for where you can put these points, it's up to you really. More chance to resist fears or stuns, better off heals, more CC, whatever you want really. Non-effect DPS, just your utility. As for the talents here, it's kind of like Moonkin, a lot of consolidation and streamlining to combine a cat and bear talents together. Leader of the pack is 5% melee crit now, with a little healing for your group on the improved version. Heart of the Wild reworked to give more AP in cat instead of strength, and Mangle. There is a version of this for cat and for bear. Think of the cat version as your new replacement for claw, it's just a straight up upgrade in every sense. On top of increasing the damage the target takes from bleeds and shred by 30%, it's more of just a maintain buff in PvE, though if you have a feral tank, they should be doing this role for you and you'd only really use it if you can't get behind the target to shred. Solid DPS if you put in the extra effort, bring that druid utility to show and a nice extra bit of crit for your group, that's feral DPS. which only makes sense to talk tank next. Here's a look at the talents, very similar to Cat, you will see. Only a few points moved into key rage generation or threat generation talents like Feral Instinct, Thick Hide, and Intensity. The Burr version of Mangle is the same debuff as Feral, but it's on a short cooldown and it hits like a truck. Believe me when I say if Burrs were the underdog tank in Classic, in TBC they are the alphas. This spec is totally insane. Its bonus armor goes up to 400% now, you get 25% more stamina from items, on top of Heart of the Wild that's 45% extra stam from items alone in Burr. No tank scales like a Feral tank does, they are a wall of health and armor. Oh, and they're actually extremely agile. Druid started to literally become near untouchable by bosses as their dodge chance was in the high 80s or 90%. Even in lesser gear, they become crazy powerful very early on. Druid tanks scaled so well, Blizzard had to put an aura in the Sunwell so the bosses stood a chance at hitting them back. If that doesn't convince you about this spec, then I don't know what else to say. And that's even if a hit gets through, you're then hitting the highest health pool and the most armor. On the downside, Ferals don't really pack the cooldowns other tanks have at all. If something goes wrong, you're praying to RNG for dodges or that your healers can back you up. Either way though, expect a big surge in the number of Druid tanks you see in TBC. Which leaves us with Restoration, what I can think safely makes up the vast majority of the Druid player base at the moment. Now, two very important things change in TBC for Resto Druids that make such a huge difference to your playstyle. First of all, heal over times are no longer exclusive buffs, so two Druids can have two rejuvenations running on the same target. Secondly, with the world buff meta and consumable stacking nerfed, you can actually cast your heals over times without having your tanks raging at you that they're gonna lose their Oni buff or something. As far as I know, the player buff cap of 32 is still there, but you're really going to have to try and go out of your way to hit that number. So here's some example talent trees. Now, you might have noticed for this one, I've just chucked points into everything that does something to your heals, and yeah, you're right. Strictly for PvE, there isn't really much we care about in the other talent trees at all. We have 7 points left here, where you can just put them wherever you want to, really. You can put them into balance, you can do a bit more DPS. You do get 1/3 of your healing as spell damage in TBC, by the way. Go for extra talents in Restoration, but there's nothing too interesting in the Feral tree. As for what's new for Restoration, not that much. It's just your playstyle that actually allows you to, well, play your class to its full potential. Gift of the Wild gets an icon, that's pretty exciting. I guess the big deal here is that similar to every other Druid spec now is you no longer get a chance to look at your tier gear and character model progression, instead you get to look at a tree. So tree is actually super powerful. Your heals on party members is increased by 25% of your total spirit, mana costs reduced by 20%, downside is you can only cast restoration stuff and your movement speed is reduced by 20%. Trees don't run very fast after all. Alternatively, just go full on pretend as though Healing Touch doesn't exist anymore and purely heal through your HOTS, bringing a fully upgraded Thorns and have more talents in the balance tree. Ignoring Healing Touch frees up 12 points to be spent elsewhere, and it lets other healers play whack-a-mole with the meters while just covering the raid in HOTS and dropping tree to add some DPS whenever you can. If you're Resto now and you love it, well, good news, it continues to be a strong choice. Which means it's time to talk about PvP. Now for this part we're going to largely be focusing on the arena. I feel that's the area of the game that most players will care about, but I'll give some brief mention to the other areas too. The short version is Feral and Moonkin are both quite underrepresented in arena in all brackets, apart from twos, as those specializations being played and geared purely for themselves, instead of a support tree for restoration. Feral is somewhat lacking in the damage department until late game gear is available, though you could say much of the same for any melee class really. It has a narrow range of comps which it's regularly played in, most commonly seen in Feral Rogue in twos. They are forced into a choice too often of having to sit in bear to stand up to rogues or warriors, or constantly spam shifting to stay on casters, since they have no built-in slow baseline. Whilst by no means being a total write-off of a spec, you're really going to have to work hard to hit the higher rankings. Whilst in open world or battleground it's quite the opposite story. Flightform makes druids just in general incredibly obnoxious in the open world. It takes to outnumber a druid to beat them really. Battleground wise, what makes them good in classic is still there. Depends how much you still like carrying flags, I guess. Also, free action potions become undispellable in a later TBC patch. As for Moonkins, they just struggle to do enough damage through their non-instant spells to provide a considerable threat, and they're very crit reliant to put out damage, which resilience actively cuts down in power exponentially as the expansion progresses. Like Feral, they find it hard to actually play their class when put in arenas against some tougher opponents. Again, it'll be a tall order to hit high ratings as a boomy. Restoration though, Resto is a different story. Pretty much everything goes right for Resto in TBC Arena. I'll bring up a spec and tell you why. So this is something along the line of what you'll be seeing for deep restoration in Arena. Along the line of its strengths, nearly everything you do is instant cast, meaning you stay mobile all the time, moving around pillars. Interrupts are rarely an issue for you. You're the hardest healer to lock down by an absolute mile with travel form. You can literally over quadruple your armor if melees ever start to train you just by pressing burr form, whilst your hots heal you back up. Predicting swaps and getting into a burr is a sign of a strong druid. Bark Skin can cover mistakes like a mini pain suppression. Your spells get a 30% reduced chance to be dispelled through the subtlety talent. This goes for offense and defensive spells. And yes, this works on Entangling Roots versus Gnome Escape Artist, by the way. You have 2 emergency heal instant cast buttons with Swift Mend and Nature's Swiftness, and this can also be used to hibernate enemy druids for an instant clone or even a root in a pinch. You have Cyclone, which renders the target immune and pauses all healing on them. You can also Cyclone big cooldowns just to disrupt the enemy players. You have an Interrupt in Feral Charge. Your PvP gloves reduce the casting time of Cyclone. Tauren have War Stomp into Cyclone, Nelves can Shadow Meld and Drink. You can shift into Form to avoid mana drains, whilst in Form you're immune to Sap and Polymorph. Basically, druids have a lot going right for them. There is also a Restokin build I mentioned early on. Here it is. The idea behind it is, instead of hopping into Burr for defense, why not just use Moonkin form instead and do some more damage? Remember, you get 1/3 of your spell damage from healing gear in TBC, so a Resto gear druid hopping into Burr is just purely for defense. You're really not going to be doing any damage, other than using it for bash or frenzied rejuvenation, maybe a demoralizing roar. Moonkin offers some offense on top of this, and that's what the build is. It sacrifices some strong restoration talents like Swift Mend and Natural Perfection to get better mana efficiency and overall damage through talents like Moonglow, Lunar Guidance and Dream State. Despite having more points in balance, you will still be gearing purely for Resto more or less. Don't let it fool you, it's just druids are so good they can get away with doing this. It's a bit like having Fury Prot in Classic at the moment. So that's PvP. Overall, you will see the vast majority of druids opting to heal. Sort of like Classic, but they'll be much stronger. Resto should be a serious consideration for any arena junkie, and is seen at the top levels of play in all arena brackets, and fits into a wide variety of different comps, usually seen with warriors, locks, mages, rogues, hunters, basically anything you want to play with it, to be honest. Which leaves us with tier gear. So this will be mainly PvE stuff, because the PvP tier up to Season 4 were just PvE recolors, and their set bonuses were always the same. It's just some resilience and some kind of ability modifier, as well as the glove bonus, of course, which I will cover in the PvP section, where it's notable just for the sake of time. The good news for tier sets in TBC is that each specialization gets one. Whilst they won't always be your best in slot, TBC definitely has some great looking sets, which may be kind of lost on druids as you're looking at your form, but it's better than only having one for restoration, right? Each tier is earned through tokens, just like how it is with Nax Rammus gear, has 5 pieces overall, and have a 2 and a 4 set bonus, apart from tier 6, which has boots, belts and wrists added in the Sunwell. There's no additional set bonuses though. There are also dungeon sets, but I'll try and only bring them up when they're really relevant. Tier 4 is the Malorn set from Karazhan and Magtheridon and Gruul's Lair. So for the Feral sets, and this goes for TBC gear in general, they have a bunch of extra armor on them, more so than your average leather items, once again reinforcing how good Burrs are. The 2 set is some more resources, very solid. The 4 set is exceptionally good for Burrs. Expect this tier to be funneled to the Ferals early. The Cat DPS variant is pretty negligible. Resto, it's more mana and shorter cooldown on Nature's Swiftness. That's okay, not too much to add there. Balance, more mana efficiency. They do struggle with mana early on in TBC. Depends how long fights are, as for how relevant this ends up being. Tier 5, Nordrassil from Serpentrine Cavern and Tempest Keep. I don't know if I like this set more or Tier 6. Probably this one. The 2 set for Feral is, it's not bad, it's just more of a solo play, or maybe I could see it in PvP as well. It's only sacrificing 2 resilience slots, so maybe there's something there. 4 set is more damage on your main abilities. Okay, cool. Restoration, more regrowth duration and bigger life bloom pops. The thing is, you don't really tend to use regrowth because it's super mana intensive and you want to keep life bloom rolling at 3 stacks normally, so Not sure how good this is. Balance, the mana reduction on regrowth here is actually significant. It's about 70% of the spell cost. So like the Feral set for this tier, but more of a solo play PvP option once again. 10% Starfire damage, very nice actually. You're always at least going to have Insect Swarm rolling, so not that bad at all. Tier 6 from Black Temple, Mount Hyjal, and the boots, belt and wrists are from Sunwell. The 2 set for Feral, you're pressing Shred as a cat. You're almost for certain going to have a Feral tank applying Mangle, unless you can't get behind the target I suppose. More threat for Burr though, you'll love to see it. Some extra damage from the 4 set, just not really on the most impactful abilities. Restoration, smaller cooldown on Swiftmend. Hopefully you shouldn't be needing this button on cooldown, but Sunwell bosses do hit like trucks, so it might be solid. And more Healing Touch bonus on the 4 set. We saw a talent build for Resto that pretends Healing Touch doesn't exist, well, outside of Nature's Swiftness, so I'm guessing this one isn't too exciting. Finally, Balance, more duration on Moonfire, which should stack up nicely with the talents to improve this ability, and extra crit on Starfire, and Balance is all about crit, so looks decent. So, Druid. Is it any better now? Well, I kind of gave it away like 5 seconds after the intro, but yes, they are considerably better than they ever were in Classic, in every single role. Whilst not coming into their stride as a top tier DPS class just yet, your raid leader has a much more compelling set of reasons to want all of those specializations around in their raid. Burr tanks are what warriors are to Classic, just overall extremely good. They struggle a little on AoE, not gonna lie, but as an off tank they're going to do the most damage by far, and their single target threat and survivability are top tier. Resto still has its spot in PvE and becomes arguably the best PvP healer in the game for arena content. I'd expect to see a much wider variety of druids in TBC, and for their place in the game to amount to much more than a fairy fire bot and a flag carrier. And today, coming through the Dark Portal for the first time, we have a very special class. One that underwent some big changes from vanilla to TBC. I present the Rogue. Wait, where's he at? I said to be here at this time. What's that? The Rogue, the class that awoke the edgy teen within us long before the Death Knight ever walked Azeroth, stealth daggers and teleporting behind you. Now, I'm sure if you've seen any other TBC videos about this class, there is quite a bit of doomsaying about the state of how the Rogue goes moving from vanilla over to TBC, especially when it comes to PvE. There is a lot riding on things which, as I'm doing this video, are still to be determined. How long are fights going to be? How will certain spells interact with each other? Is your raid spot truly gone? Do I need to re-roll, or can I still play a melee class and do fine? Hopefully I'll be able to talk you through and allow you to make your decision depending on what kind of environment you are playing in. Be it from a guy who considers themselves very casual to somebody who enjoys getting the most possible out of their class. Well, let's go over the things we get baseline, and then as we look at PvE and later PvP, we can cover the more specialization specific things. Deadly Throw is new in the Assassination tree. This uses your combo points for an instant ranged attack, slowing the target's movement speed by 50% for 6 seconds, with a nice upgrade from the PvP gloves to also add an interrupt on that same effect, because as we will see in the PvP section later, rogues go to pretty insane power levels during this expansion. But this ability is only ever really used during PvP scenarios. Envenom was also added in TBC. It works just like Eviscerate, but it does nature damage, so bypassing all armor. On the downside in TBC, it consumes 1 stack of deadly poison per combo point used, and it never really came into use too much throughout any area in the expansion. Armor reducing effects ended up being more effective than ones that increased nature damage, so players just opted into using Eviscerate for a big damaging finishing move. Shiv was added to the combat tree. This ability that scaled its energy cost with your weapon speed instantly applies your offhand weapon poison, making it a versatile ability you should definitely keep in mind. In PvE to keep stacks of deadly poison up if needed, and most of the time in PvP to guarantee applying a crippling poison or a mind-numbing poison. It also grants 1 combo point. In the subtlety tree we have Cloak of Shadows, probably one of the most overpowered abilities ever added to any class ever. It removes all harmful spell effects apart from CCs that stop you acting, like Hand of Justice or Polymorph, and gives you a 90% chance to resist them for 5 seconds. So there is a small chance you cloak and then get instantly hit by a Frostbite proc, for example, but most casters will just go full on defensive mode versus this though. It's not really worth playing into the odds most of the time. Finally, new poisons, or just buffs to poisons I should say. They now last 1 hour baseline instead of having charges. Blind no longer needs blinding powder, however Vanish still needs flash powder though because reasons. You get to use deadly poison in PvE now because the debuff cap is raised to 40. Wound poison gets an enormous buff. Now instead of reducing flat healing, it's percentage based up to 50% at 5 stacks, making it very strong in PvP. Finally, we have anesthetic poison, which I genuinely totally forgot exists until doing this video. It's basically instant poison that doesn't do any threat. So yeah, I mean if poisons are causing you to over aggro on a regular basis, then I'm not really sure what to say about that. As for leveling, first of all, a lot of the quests as of a later patch in TBC are now toned down to have far fewer elite mobs in them. Think areas like Jinthur Law in the Hinterlands or Strongguard in the Raffi Highlands, making solo quest content a lot more simple for a class that can typically have issues without having their full set of cooldowns. Rogues still have no self-healing beyond bandages or potions. Combat is still really the go-to spec, though honestly the PvP specs still aren't even that bad for leveling either, and let's be honest, we would all want to have things like Shadow Step be part of our kit baseline, not to mention all the lower energy costs that sub has that just makes it feel a lot more fluid to play. Deep Assassination into Mutilate doesn't really get much of a look in, being a spec that requires you to be behind your target to do damage, whilst leveling has never really worked out that well, but there isn't really too much other to look at than that here. So then, PvE as a rogue. Where do we begin? As I'm sure you know, in Classic, rogues are the second best overall DPS. Mages can be up there, but they're all working as a team to build a big ignite, whilst warriors are the clear number 1. However, moving through the Dark Portal, things change. Early on, rogues take a pretty big fall on the meters, and this isn't just exclusive to rogues either. The early tiers in the Burning Crusade are packed with really melee-unfriendly mechanics. On top of this, if you stuck, well, just about any melee class, say versus a Warlock or a Hunter on a patchwork target dummy, they are not going to be keeping up. But then again, there are other classes that we know about in TBC and specializations that will nearly always be finding themselves a raid spot, not because of their damage, but what they can offer to increase the raid's performance as a whole. Your Boonkins, your Ret Pallies, your Enhanced Shaman, surely the Rogue has something similar. They have Kick, that's nice, I mean other classes can do that. Kidney Shot is a unique stun that doesn't share a DR with anything else, that's really good. Think fights like Satur in Classic, Disarm Trap in the Suppression Room in BWL. Is there anything like that in TBC? Well, no, there isn't. What's left then? So we have the damage the rogue can bring, as well as expose armor. And I'm going to end up talking about expose armor quite a bit more than I expected, and I'll probably start calling it EA as well. Because as far as unique selling points go, that's what the rogue has got, apart from their damage of course, and that damage profile may not end up coming really strong until deep into tier 6. But it depends. If we get nerfed content and much shorter fights than expected, combat can absolutely still pump on the meters. They've still got Blade Flurry, Adrenaline Rush on top of their Trinket, perhaps even Drums, Blood Fury, and a Bloodlust on top of that. Stack them up and the yellows will still be relevant. It's just after the cooldowns have worn out, so does the damage until late game gearing. Let's talk about the new specialization stuff and what you should expect to be using in PvE encounters, then we can talk about rogue damage and EA usage a little bit more. For the assassination tree, Garrote now has a 3-second silence attached to it because what rogues really needed in TBC is more CC. There isn't all that much new to this tree other than that, to be honest. We have some interesting new talents like Find Weakness, but you rarely go this far down into this talent tree. Mutilate is the end of tree ability, instantly attacking with both weapons that both must be daggers, and a 50% increased damage modifier versus poison targets. Unfortunately, you have to be behind the target. Mutilate is just straight up not really used for anything. I mean, it does good damage, but on the downside, it's got a very high energy cost, a positional requirement, and you need 2 good daggers. Those are a lot of boxes to tick when you could just be pressing Sinister Strike and be good. As for the combat tree, this is what you're more or less always going to be playing in PvE. New stuff rogues get include Evasion now has a 25% chance to dodge ranged attacks. Mace Spec now gives some more crit on top of the stun chance, which has its own DR. Combat Potency gives your offhand a 20% chance to generate some energy. so you definitely want to find a very fast offhand to make the most of this. Weapon skill on items and talents is gone, as you can see here, and has been replaced with expertise, which is a new stat for TBC that decreases an enemy's chance to dodge and parry, just another thing to consider capping alongside your hit. And at the end of the tree we have surprise attacks that make your main abilities do 10% more damage and no longer be able to be dodged. It's kind of a forgettable end of tree ability really. Here is a ballpark kind of specialization you may see. Pretty much everything you see in the combat tree is quite set in stone as for what you will want to use to boost your DPS, including those new talents which we just went over. In the assassination tree, some people prefer more points in eviscerate, some into murder, but it depends whether or not you are expected to be using improved exposed armor. There are of course variations on the build depending on what your best available weapons are. It's pretty self-explanatory. Take points out of sword, put them into whatever you're using. Unless you have daggers where you have to move some points out from the assassination tree over to opportunity in the sub tree. What's new for sub then? Well, there are more than just a few improvements, but I think I'll save them for the next section, which is PvP. And I've managed to get hold of some of the footage from the beta back from TBC of when Blizzard were working on changes for rogues in PvP. So this is a bit exclusive and maybe I shouldn't be sharing it, but just keep it a little bit on the down low for me, okay? Here it is. Alrighty, that's Warlock done, looks pretty balanced. What's next? Of course, rogues. Man, that whole stun lock thing they had going back in vanilla was pretty crazy. Maybe we should dial that back a little.
You know what I hate, Mark?
What's that, John?
Getting kited. That's no fun.
Well, rogues do have Vanish and Sprint. Those are both used for—
No, we need more. Rogues should have charge, but better.
something like
Malignant Displacer of Shadow, Hatred of—
What about Shadow Step?
Oh, okay, that works. You know what else I don't like? Magic. It shouldn't be a thing. Does damage, stops me going into stealth, not a fan. We need something to remove all magic, like Deceptive, Shade of Evil.
We could call it a Cloak of
Shadows.
Sure, yeah, let me just write that one down.
Mages, you know when you stun them and they just blink away? That isn't fair. Rogues need a silence.
Oh, and what's this going to be called, I suppose? Lethal? Shadow of Merciless Vengeance? Quietude of Stillness?
What are you talking about, Mark? Just put a silence on Garou.
Did you always have those shoulders on, John?
Well, good meeting, gotta go. I can sense a level 61 trying to do the PvP objectives in Hellfire Peninsula. Duty calls.
When it comes to PvP, rogues were given such a massive number of buffs to their already huge toolkit that they became one of the best, if not the overall best DPS class in Arena throughout the expansion. Let's bring up a spec here straight away. This is your standard 20-0-41 Shadow Step. Talents like Vile Poisons are vital to protect your wound poison stacks as well as your other ones. Don't forget that weapon swapping to Shiv is a viable tactic to apply mind-numbing poison against certain comps. The talents in the subtree here are quite set in stone. Sap no longer drops combat by default anymore, and the improved Sap talent is now changed to be much better, now reducing the cost and increasing the range of Sap and Blind. A fully talented Blind is a 15 yard, 15 energy, 1.5 minute cooldown, instant cast, 10 second CC, and yes, it's pretty overpowered. One of your key playmaking abilities. It's no longer a poison either, so take that, dwarves, and your niche racial, which could be used to get rid of it in Classic. It's now a physical effect. Dirty Deeds now has an execute added on for all your abilities, because why not? Cheat Death, of course, another iconic rogue ability activated automatically once per minute to absorb an attack that would have been lethal, with all damage taken afterwards reduced scaling with your resilience, so it won't be quite as powerful as you remember it being if we release on 2.43, at least in the earlier seasons. And of course, Shadow Step, because one of the few things rogues were missing was good mobility. Fix that problem now. Keep in mind though, TBC Shadow Step is against enemies only. It was changed to against a target in a later expansion. You'll notice over in the assassination tree that, again, improved exposed armor is being taken. Why would you want that as a rogue in PvP? Well, look at it this way. Armor scaling at low values is pretty big. A Season 3 or Season 4 gear caster would be somewhere around the 3k armor mark, depending on the class baseline, which means there'd be around 25% or so physical damage reduced. On the other hand, a target at 20k armor is only at about 65% reduced physical damage, so exposed armor against squishy targets is boosting your damage massively, whilst being kinda negligible against very high armor targets. Imagine if EA said straight up do 20% more damage against clothies, because that's kind of what it's doing for you. then you would probably want to keep it up all the time. So yeah, if you want to PvP a lot in TBC and be a beast, you definitely want to consider Rogue. Let's move on and have a look at some tier sets now though. Just to give it a quick mention, there are 3 main raid tier sets that we will look at. The PvP sets are recolors apart from Season 4. However, PvP set bonuses never change between seasons, and the main interesting thing about the PvP tier is mainly just the interrupt on the gloves. As for PvE though, let's take a look. Tier 4, Neverblade from Karazhan, Magtheridon and Gruul's Lair. The 2 set, more slice and dice duration, that's your main spender, a small addition, but it should help you keep everything up and rolling as you need. The 4 set, 15% chance to get a combo point from a finisher, pretty small chance, but it adds up with a Ruthlessness talent and gives you a chance to get 2 combo points straight off a finisher, which isn't half bad. Tier 5, Death Mantle from Serpent Shrine Cavern and Tempest Keep. The looks on this set though, can we get any edgier? 2 set, 40 more damage per combo point on your big finishers. The big brains in the community will no doubt have this mathed out whether this is any better than pressing Rupture. The 4 set seems really nice, actually looks to have a pretty good proc rate as well. We'll have to see how it ends up being on the live server, and it would really make your life a lot easier in juggling all these different spenders you have to as a rogue. Tier 6, the Slayer set from Hyjal, Black Temple and the Sunwell. One of the best looking sets ever, and the bonuses are equally great by the looks of it. The 2 set is 5% more haste from Slice and Dice, that's great, it's your main spending ability that you're going to have up all the time. And the 4 set, 6% more damage from all your builders. Yep, that's pretty good. Rogues seem to be one of the classes where they don't really have any totally meh tier set bonuses on them. Can't say that's true for every class. So the Rogue, is it any better now? Well, in PvE, it'll be some time until you are back up near the top of the meters. You are considered to have quite a slow start to the expansion, as well as, at least it looks like, you're going to have a job of applying exposed armor for potentially the whole duration of the expansion to buff physical damage for the whole raid. Mainly for the hunters though, quite the twist of fate from then giving you True Shot aura for the past year and a half or so. PvP, however, you start off as one of the best and you never give that position up. The class is just totally insane in Arena, can definitely recommend. And today we have the other half of the new race class combo to come with the Burning Crusade. If you think Shamans are going to be hype on the Alliance side, wait till you see how many Paladins there will be on the Horde. And not just because it's a new class either, people, it turns out, to like elves a lot. And well, Blizzard were very much onto this fact too.
What's exciting about the Blood Elves is they're kind of the first pretty race that the Horde has gotten. A lot of the Horde characters are very monstrous, which turn off a lot of players. A certain demographic only likes to play really attractive looking characters, so the Blood Elves will bring a prettier face to the Horde.
But I don't think even they could have predicted how swaying a pretty Horde race would truly be over time. But we aren't here to fawn over elves. We're here to talk the Paladin. Paladins have without a doubt come a very long way from Classic being considered a class with a very narrow scope of viability within any competitive scene. Blizzard finally gave them the tools to escape another 2 years of wearing a blue dress. They fleshed out and really made the other 2 specs that had been so long neglected by the majority of the community have some real tangible strengths. This is a class with a huge amount of depth, so we better make a start. You know the drill by now. First up, what's new? Baseline, and then we'll get onto the spec specifics afterwards. Righteous Defense, a taunt. The mad lads at Blizzard actually gave Paladins a taunt. This was the key tanking mechanic protection was ever so desperately missing in Classic that simply just made them struggle enormously in raid content. Sure, there was the whole Blessing a King spam that actually did good consistent threat, but if a DPS rips it off you, well, you don't have a button to instantly get the target back onto you. Righteous Defense is a little different from your average taunt too. In fact, most of the time it's just better. It's actually cast on a friendly target, taunting 3 enemy targets off them at once, and it has a 40-yard range too, so if it's melee range on a friendly target, well, everybody would have to be sitting on top of the tank. Spiritual Attunement is a new passive that goes hand in hand with Righteous Defense to make Paladins a great tank. Pretty simple in how it works, 10% of friendly heals are given as mana, meaning the Paladin will have enough fuel in the tank to be able to press the buttons, even on longer boss fights. It only works on heals that actually gain you health as well. It used to work from overhealing for a period of time. People had Paladins in a group with a Shadow Priest and they could literally not go no matter how hard they tried. It has a lesser use for Ret too, which we'll get onto later. Avenging Wrath, aka Wings, the big iconic DPS cooldown for the Paladin. It's probably a little different from how you remember it, however. 30% extra damage, no bonus healing for 20 seconds. Also causes forbearance, so it's kind of an all-in type spell in PvP, since this debuff will stop the use of bubble. Also, it is a magic buff, so watch out for mages and spell steal. Even still, it's a great cooldown to stack with heroism, trinkets, potions, and gives your protection paladin a nice extra amount of threat generated through its duration. Crusader Aura, not quite as exciting as the other spells so far, but 20% extra mounted speed for you and your party. It doesn't stack with similar effects, however, like Riding Crop. It's something I guess you'll have a weak aura to say, remember to press the button when you mount. Turn Evil, I forgot this one existed to be honest, it's like an upgraded Turn Undead. Now works versus demons too, which is pretty handy since demons aren't too hard to find in Outland. And finally there are two new seals, Seal of Blood and Seal of Vengeance. So you know how both factions get Paladins and Shaman now. I'm guessing Blizzard wanted to keep a little something faction specific. Shamans get different flavours of heroism or bloodlust, but they both do the same thing, so no issues there. Seal of Blood and Vengeance, however, don't do the same thing. And all data from back in the day, from the likes of elitist jerks to people on fan servers perfecting and optimising the Paladin, points towards Seal of Blood being better the majority of the time. But I'd like to carry on for now, and we can talk more about this in detail in the Ret part of PvE. Leveling wise, Paladin still does Paladin stuff for, well, quite a while, which is this. Spiritual Attunement actually has a rank learned very early on to make prot more interesting even for low level dungeons, which is super nice. Once you are in Outland though, you have your Crusader Strike, most likely if you're Ret. You have your Exorcism, which is going to be seeing a lot of action and is a great, albeit rather expensive extra button to add some punch to your single target. AoE farming has become an even better option for Paladins now, providing you can get your hands on some nice spell power gear early on, due to their infinite AoE scaling through Consecration. Also, Protection Paladins are without a doubt the kings of smaller group content. I'm talking your frequent pulls of multiple mobs in heroic dungeons in Kara or in ZA. Their AoE threat is just the best and the most consistent. They have a ranged taunt and all the standard blessings you can expect from the Paladin. Solo leveling, they are somewhat improved upon Classic, but if you take the dungeon or group route as prot, I think you're going to have a very good time. With that out the way, let's get on to the interesting stuff, PvE. Let's start with what most of the Paladin population will be playing at the moment, Holy. Now, playstyle wise, what Holy was good at in Classic is still what they're good at in TBC, and indeed has really become their niche over time. Very strong and efficient single target healing. Here is the type of spec you may see in PvE content, and it's very useful that Holy can easily fit all three talent upgrades for blessings into their standard build, those being Wisdom, Kings and Might. And I suppose I should mention that ideally you would like to have at least 3 Paladins in your raid group, solely for blessings if nothing else, because they offer such great bonuses overall. The main ones you want to see are Salvation, Kings and Might or Wisdom, and one Paladin can only do one type of blessing per player. Some classes of course like both Might and Wisdom, like Enhancement or Rets, so there's some decision making to be had there. But just know that you'll have a job of making sure everybody has the right blessing running all the time, and don't worry, I'm sure they will let you know if they don't. Oh, and be glad you never had to deal with 5-minute lesser and 10-minute greater blessings. Their durations have thankfully been buffed up a little bit more. Anyways, talking about Holy, I guess the big news for this spec is Consecration is now baseline for Paladins. This is just such a great addition. I don't think there's a Paladin spec out there in Classic that doesn't aim to pick this talent up. It's just too useful to the class overall. We have some extra aura range from the aptly named Aura Mastery. Holy Shock cooldown has been halved, as well as given a much better spell damage coefficient as of a later patch. TBC is the real rise of the Shockadin, which we will definitely be talking about in PvP. Light's Grace and Holy Guidance are the real 2 talents that change your playstyle. In Classic you more or less just bash Flash of Light non-stop, because damage tends to be pretty bursty. Even if no one's taking damage, you just press the button. For Holy Palas, thanks to these 2 talents, it becomes much more attractive to just Holy Light and stack Intellect as high as you possibly can. Also, yes, down ranking is still a thing. Blizzard did try to nerf it, but I guess they didn't quite do a good enough job. Divine Illumination is your new end of tree talent, 50% reduced mana cost for 15 seconds, which is pretty strong and lets the Paladin be the mana efficient healer you are used to, which they sort of needed because Illumination gets nerfed. Pretty hard at that. This was the talent that made Paladins quite literally just not go in once you started to hit late game gear in Classic, especially stacking that up with world buffs. Here it's down to 60% mana refund, it used to be 100%, and yes, it was pretty overpowered as a passive effect. So now Paladins actually have a bit more of a mortal mana bar, which is a pretty big change, I guess. Next up, Protection. So as we've mentioned, Protection actually gets the tools it needs to be a real tank, but were they actually any good at it? Let's have a little look. To start off with, here's a very defense-oriented setup for content where you would be expecting to take some pretty heavy damage, 25-man raids pretty much. Reckoning changes, it's no longer this mysterious invisible buff that disappears when you mount up for unexplained reasons. This talent's always confused me a bit. Instead, it's like this: when you get hit by anything, you have a percentage chance for your next 4 swings to generate an extra attack, meaning it's a pretty decent 1-point wonder talent for most content. Protection scales very well as the expansion goes on through stamina stacking on talents like Sacred Duty, Combat Expertise, as well as a nice bit of extra damage reduction from improved Righteous Fury. Improved Holy Shield makes Paladin a lot more sturdy, very reminiscent of how improved shield block works for warriors. Extra charges, more threat, less damage incoming, and should have a very good uptime unless you're taking damage from a great number of enemies at once, as in over 12 attacks within the space of 10 seconds. Avenger's Shield, the iconic end of tree ability for the Paladin, though I'm betting it will be different to how you remember it, because it has a 1-second cast time. Of course, you can't dodge, block, or parry whilst casting, and it will chain to 3 enemies nearby maximum. It also applies a daze, which is a 50% slow. So it's pretty much a good snap threat ability at the start of a fight, or to be used as a tool to pull mobs, which Paladins were really missing in Classic. Just make sure you don't accidentally chain pull or the daze doesn't split up the mobs too much. As for the tanking performance for Protection Paladins, there are some great guides out there to really get stuck into the subject, but just to give you a brief mention, as they work very differently from other tanks. They have very few abilities with threat modifiers on them, like the likes of Lacerate or Heroic Strike. The vast majority of their threat is more or less entirely from holy damage dealt. This means their itemization to build threat is how much spell damage can I put on without dying, whereas their defensive gearing can cut into that threat generation heavily, especially when you're aiming for defensive caps early on. This means protections are more often seen as off tanks to late game gearing. Saying that, it all depends on the content difficulty, and there's some content where the Protection Paladin feels too good to ignore, like basically the entire trash phase of Mount Hyjal or Morrogrim and SSC to name 2. And you know I can't just leave prop there, because they're a lot more than just a tank in TBC. They are now the best AoE farming or boosting class in the game, thanks to the AoE damage caps putting a stop to the tyranny of the Mage, that is. Consecration wasn't AoE damage capped. Why? Dunno, but it wasn't. As for exactly what build you'll want, it's all about striking a balance. Where will be the best spots to farm? How is your gear? Are you not dying but you're going slow, or fast but you don't make the runs consistently? A more defensive build might look something like this. Key points are making sure that we go far enough into Ret to pit up Sanctity Aura. Ret Aura isn't worth it anymore due to how Consecration scales so exceptionally well, and you can even bubble and throw up a Holy Wrath if you are mass pulling or dead or demons too. Something along this line might even be good in dungeons due to its extra damage if you aren't at the risk of dying. Or maybe there's so little risk in the dungeon or boost you're doing, you can just go full on with some ridiculous spec and get as much damage as possible out of the class. You've heard of Prot Fury, but what about Prot Ret? Pretty much going deep enough into Ret for Vengeance, which means your crits increase holy and physical damage by 15% at 3 stacks, build stacks faster through Reckoning, more move speed from Pursuit of Justice, and with full Vengeance stacks that would be 25% more holy damage dealt. It sounds pretty good, or maybe just insta-die to anything because you're so squishy. It's just an idea, and it sounds like something that could be fun to try out. Well, that leaves us with one spec left, Retribution. So Rets in Classic were, you know, a little bit lower down, shall we say. And for TBC, they get some amazing buffs to make them a much more competitive class, and as we will see, bring some very strong raid-wide buffs too. All the same, they don't go from one of the bottom DPS to suddenly near the top. You need to wait one more expansion for that. They can, however, do some very respectable respectable damage by later phases of the game too, with some more gear in their inventory, and assuming they are hitting a demon or undead, which are in no short supply. However, as with like a few other specs we've seen so far, they are largely more there for their utility, like your enhancement shamans or your boomkins. Blessing of Might now affects all attack power, not just melee. Improved Seal of the Crusader gives 3% crit against a target, making it a great raid-wide buff. Improved Sanctity Aura also gives members of your party a flat 2% extra damage. It's these combined reasons that a ret is really nice to have about. Sanctified Judgments helps out with those mana issues, and Crusader Strike right at the bottom of the tree, an ability that oh so nearly made it into vanilla for Paladins but was replaced with the Seal and Judgment system. Not only another button to press for some nice damage, but also refreshes all judgments on the target, which is actually extremely useful, especially so your Holy Pally doesn't have to stop what they're doing to run over and melee the boss to keep their judgment running. So I guess I have to talk Seal of Vengeance versus Seal of Blood now, right? I did do a full video on it a while back, and I'll link that because there really is that much to talk about in the subject. Seal of Vengeance is what the Alliance gets, stacking a holy damage dot, where the judgment does more damage per stack, up to 5 stacks maximum. Horde got Seal of Blood that does bonus damage with each melee swing, and a small amount of reflect damage back to the Paladin. The judgment does something pretty much the same along that line, which can actually be beneficial that they are taking damage, because they will then be able to restore mana through being healed thanks to spiritual attunement. So the short version is, since Seal of Blood scales off weapons, and with haste that lower your swing timer, it will do overall more damage than the Alliance rets will be able to do with their combination of Seal of Vengeance and Command. Seal of Vengeance is better for protection until later on in the game when this Librum comes out, and Alliance rets still have Seal of Command, which is decent early on but does not compete with the haste scaling on Blood. So that is a brief look at PvE for you. How's the Paladin looking in PvP then? Well, first things first, protection specs, and this just goes for all of them actually, are not a thing in Arena, which I'm sure you are glad to hear if you've been playing Shadowlands from launch. They simply do not do any kind of damage which is threatening, they're just damage sponges themselves. As for the other two specs, they do see some representation though in a somewhat narrow variety of comps. But we've got to start with the meme because it really came to life in TBC, the Shockadin. Here is a random spec I threw together. I couldn't really find any resources online, so I've no idea how bad this is. Don't judge me, okay? So Holy Shock would have a 25% crit modifier baseline through Holy and Purifying Power, better spell damage scaling through Holy Guidance, and of course Sanctity Aura instead of Divine Illumination, because we need damage, not mana efficiency. I also picked up Eye for an Eye, might as well be doing something useful between shock cooldowns. This is very much all in on the shock though, not what you would be seeing from a serious Holy PvP build, though Holy can actually do some surprising burst, very much at the expense of some of their larger cooldowns though. As for a Holy Pala that isn't living the meme, here's something more like it. Deep Holy with most of the standard talents that we saw for PvE, however new more PvP oriented choices include Unyielding Faith, Stoicism for some dispel protection, and improved Concentration Aura and Spiritual Focus that make your spells immune to pushback as well. Improved Righteous Fury is decent when it doesn't get dispelled, as it's a free 6% less damage taken. Holy Paladins are somewhat in a similar spot to Resto Shamans really. They need to cast to get their big heals off, though I'd argue despite their higher armor values they are overall more vulnerable to the metagaming in TBC. The real big strong cooldown bubble is pretty much their only consistent line of defense against getting bursted out, and even then Blizzard decided to give Priest the ability to remove this through Mass Dispel, and you aren't going to be seeing a shortage of Priest in PvP. As for arena representation, they see some play in 2s, mainly with Warriors, which has more or less always been a good 2s combo, with likes of Blessing of Freedom and even Sacrifice, which can't be ignored to prevent CC chains from setting up on the Paladin. 3s is where Holy can really struggle due to being easily shut down by aggressive comps, though they are seen in 5s due to their overall great utility. Retribution also sees play in high level arenas, though once again in quite a narrow scope of comps. You more or less don't see a Ret without a Shaman somewhere, usually Resto. Why? Wind Fury is why. Ret actually has very strong burst, it just needs a little bit of luck in the mix to truly pop off. Here's an idea spec, quite similar to your PvE Ret really, though with more points into protection for things like improved Hammer of Justice, 45-second cooldown on an instant cast 6-second stun is pretty good, as well as Repentance being another 6-second CC on a 20-yard range. Also, your seals are practically immune to dispels thanks to Stoicism and Sanctified Seals. Interestingly, there is another popular build that doesn't even take Crusader Strike. I know, madness. All this time waiting for this ability and not even using it? What's up with that then? Well, it's kind of mana intensive to use on cooldown for a start, and your damage is already burst reliant to begin with, so why not relive some of the Reckoning Dreams from Classic? This moves some of the talents from deep into the ret tree back over to Protection, with any attack against you having a 10% chance to grant your next 4 swings an extra attack. If getting trained by the likes of a rogue, for example, that's going to be a pretty solid uptime. Combine a little Wind Fury totem and you can really delete people with cooldowns running. Speaking of cooldowns and about wings though, as mentioned earlier, they do cause forbearance, so make sure you're in a position to all in, or they can be quickly dispelled or leave you open to a hard swap whilst you can't bubble. Retribution sees a lot of play in 2s, mainly with Resto Shaman, same deal in 3s, along with a warrior as the 3rd class. Paladins definitely have a few top tier arena teams, just not in as diverse of a cast of comps as other classes are. So let's finish this up on tier gear. If you can say one thing about Paladin tier gear, is there at least winners when it comes to appearances for all 3 raid sets. Tier 4, the Justicar Armor. Protection, more damage on a few seals. Funnily enough, blood is the least useful one here for prot palas between both factions, but it's a nice bit of extra damage for the Alliance prots. 4 sets a bit more damage on Holy Shield, stacks up with your talents. Not bad. Retribution 2 set, more damage bonus on a Judgment of the Crusader. I went to check and it's about 32 bonus holy damage, so yeah, not exactly the best. The 4 set, more damage on Judgment of Command, take that Blood Elves and your fancy new seal. The 2 set, more heals from your Seal of Light, not bad, your whole raid will benefit from this. The 4 set, less cooldown on Divine Favour, again it's okay, a guarantee crit on a bit of a smaller cooldown. Tier 5, the Crystal Forge Armor. Protection 2 set, 50 more damage on Retribution Aura. Does that make it better than Sanctity for damage? I'm thinking that it won't, no. The 4 set is a big bonus to block after the first attack hitting your Holy Shield. Depends on the encounter, I suppose, niche use. The Ret 2 and 4 set are both not contributing much, let's put it like that. Maybe I'm underrating the group-wide heal. Holy, similar to Ret, doesn't seem great. 50 mana isn't anything to write home about, and a shorter Holy Light once per minute. Tier 6, Light Forge Armor. Thankfully, things turn around here, and there are some very nice bonuses to be had. The Prot 2 set, 10% more mana from Spiritual Attunement. I'm assuming this is a percentage of what Spiritual Attunement is baseline, that being 10, so this is a bonus 1% extra, though if it is a flat 10, that is insane, but if it's what I think it is, it's okay. The 4 set is 10% more damage on Consecration, which is amazing. This is your best spell for pretty much everything, and you will definitely want to get your hands on this. Retribution 2 set, some mana return on your melees, that's okay. The 4 set would be great if Hammer of Wrath didn't reset your swing timer. It still has a cast time, so it's not worth using as far as I'm aware. Holy 2 set, 5% more crit on Holy Light. This is again fantastic, it's your main heal. You're going to be stacking a huge amount of mana by tier 6, so this is really great. 4 set, more heals from Flash of Light. It's sort of outdone by Holy Light in TBC by this point though. So there we have it, a quick little rundown of the Paladin in TBC, but is it any better now? For all intents and purposes, yes. Protection is now a real tank thanks to the new abilities they get. Retribution are very much wanted as part of a raid group and have their place in Arena too. Holy, I would say, struggle the most when compared to Classic. A 40% nerf on Illumination just isn't anything to gloss over. They can still do very well in raid content and have a few solid arena comps too. No doubt there's going to be a huge amount of people waiting to live the Ret dream without being a meme, and I'm kind of hoping that Prot being a proper tank now is going to be sort of like when Death Knights came out at the start of Wrath, where there was this sudden huge influx of new players who actually want to play a tank class and gear them up beyond the first few weeks. And Through the Portal today is one of the most played classes by far throughout the duration of Classic. With free food and water, teleports to major cities, portals, the best AoE by far, the best gold farmer, the best booster, the fastest solo leveler, the best caster DPS, one of the best PvPers, this class quite literally does not have a weak point, well, apart from the mana bar I suppose. And did you know back in the vanilla beta, mages even had a spell called Khadgar's Unlocking because Blizzard couldn't bear the thought that another class would be better at them than something, or well, anything for that matter. Mages were treated like true kings throughout vanilla, and for Classic our 1.12 release made them even better than they would have been back in the day. That is one sheer legacy to live up to, but the higher you climb, the farther you have to fall. And to some extent the rug was pulled out from under the mage's feet in TBC and they fell down somewhat in power levels. Is the class dead then? Rerolled to a better caster? The time of the mage finally over? Far from it. In fact, I think mages have some potential to be a lot better than many people are giving them credit for. Let's see how the mage changed in TBC. What new toys does the mage get baseline then? Some very solid ones, that's what. Invisibility, a gradual threat reduction effect that mages were so far missing, fading over 5 seconds. Invisibility is one of those spells that's never really changed all that much throughout WoW's duration. If you've ever played a mage, you probably understand exactly how it will work. It's in its own category apart from stealth, and you get a screen effect that's ever so reminiscent of Lord of the Rings. Mage Table, or Ritual of Refreshment, as it's properly called, I'm sure you'll be relieved to hear is brought in for TBC, though in a later patch. This does need you to get hold of the new ranks of food and water in TBC2, both of which are random dungeon drops, though with the volume of players ploughing through them, they shouldn't be overly rare, assuming they're in at launch of course. Also, the table has 50 charges with a 5-minute cooldown, so ration it. Also, there is a new rank of Mana Gem too. Spell Steal does what it says on the tin, steals a spell, or more specifically, one beneficial magical buff from an enemy. Pretty costly to cast, this is used in all areas of content really, taking cooldowns or heals in PvP, used to take a few extremely powerful buffs in PvE, like the haste buff from the Flamecasters in ZA, if anyone remembers that one. 30 seconds of mega hyper heroism, there's a lot of fun to be had with this spell. And it's one that's caused a few headaches in design space at Blizzard too over the years. Spell Steal is even used for the mage to tank in some raid encounters as well. And last but not least for the Arcane tree is Arcane Blast, the filler spell that actually makes Arcane into a real strong independent DPS tree that don't need no help from fire or frost. Arcane Missiles just never really cut it as a proper damage spell though. Arcane Blast though, Blast very much does, and we'll be talking more about this spell when we get into PvE. Molten Armor was added, this is your new go-to PvE buff armor. It's some extra crit, no brainer really. Also in a later patch, mage armors were made undispellable, which is really nice, mainly for PvP. And then we have Ice Lance, the other side of the shatter combo that you probably know was missing from Classic. Now you can shatter from miles away instead of having to be a bit more up close and personal with Cone of Cold or Fire Blast. More or less only ever used in PvP due to the nature of Frost Nova effects breaking quickly in dungeons, or mobs just being straight up immune in raids. On to leveling then. So mages are pretty infamous for their ability to AoE grind efficiently in Classic. And for TBC, I'm sure the latest and greatest AoE spots will be mapped out in the open world pretty quickly, or that dungeon grinds may just be now the go-to. And you may have indeed heard regarding AoE that Warlocks are the new kings of it because of Seed of Corruption, but they don't get that till level 70. Mages though keep the AoE they get in vanilla and get some new additional toys on top of that between level 60 and 70, be it from their baseline spells or new talents. But I guess with all this talk of leveling and AoE, it's time to bring up the AoE cap. This is a huge change that especially affects the mage's power level. In vanilla and all the way up to patch 2.2 in the Burning Crusade, area of effect scaled up infinitely. As long as you can live, you can pull any number of mobs and you will be fine. I'm sure we've all seen videos or examples of mages pulling over 300 mobs inside Maradon and AoEing them all down, but by a later stage of TBC, Blizzard started to take notice and they put a pretty swift stop to it. So all AoE spells got a hard damage cap. Apart from effects that persist on the ground, think like Consecration, say hello to your new boosting overlords by the way, or the periodic debuff from Flamestrike. Here is an archive post of a player testing in TBC as of patch 2.4.1. As for numbers on Blizzard's TBC, I'm sure we will know once we have the beta. The cap was set to 10 mobs maximum, but that doesn't mean you couldn't go over the damage threshold cap at a lower volume of mobs if you have some kind of buff active and your spells are just hitting hard enough. So let's take an example number lower than these cap just for the sake of simplicity, and say Arcane Explosion is capped at 1000 damage. To press Arcane Explosion, it does 100 damage to all 10 mobs, not counting crits. Simple. Once you add an 11th mob to the pack though, you are over the possible damage cap for the number of mobs you are hitting. So instead of 100 per 10, it's now 90 per 11. 15 mobs, it would be 66. 20, it would be about 50. Also, spell damage and bonus effects do not raise the damage cap, so as your gear gets better, you are actually just hitting the cap earlier. This means what we see at the moment with mages pulling literally infinite amounts of mobs and being able to take them all down slowly will no longer be a thing. Does it totally kill off their AoE though? Well, not entirely. Mages just need some help now. Whilst their actual AoE was capped, the effects that enabled these mass pulls were not. Those being things like permafrost and improved blizzard. And remember, if you aren't hitting the mob cap or the damage cap, mage AoE is still extremely powerful. Don't sleep on it. Oh, and also AoE caps are static per spell rank too, so you can't cheat the system. Let's move on to PvE then. Now this is an area where mages get quite a lot of negative press, as other range classes perform more consistently throughout the duration of the expansion. And your ideal raid comp has a lot of slots for classes that bring very valuable buffs or debuffs. Can the mage offer something like that then? Well, you have your arcane intellect, of course, as your food and water. Those are more out of combat benefits though. What else do we have then? We've got spell steal. On certain fights, mages spell steal a very powerful buff from an enemy, like spell shield on High King Morgar, or dampen magic on the Illidari Council to allow them to effectively tank the boss. Mages are amazing in dungeons too, with their toolkit of hard CC, interrupts, slows, and AoE damage. When it comes to raid content though, they are the pure DPS class you would expect, and that is what they offer. No one else is really benefiting from Winter's Chill. Warlocks would want to mage about if they end up playing Fire Spec at any point due to improved Scorch, but that's really about it. The vast majority of the time, what you bring is DPS, which isn't bad, nor is it the best. Well, unless you get help with a certain spec and gear combo, which we will talk about in a moment. One thing I really did notice when researching the mage for TBC is there is such a huge variance in person to person's preference for what is the best talent setup, and that you can really make an argument for playing all three specs at different points throughout the expansion. This is really a luxury you may not appreciate. For so many other specs out there, there's just a bunch of mandatory talents and very little wiggle room. For the mage, it's surprisingly flexible in the number of different approaches they have, and I think that's a really good place to be. So let's take a look at some specs, and I'll cover what's new in the various talent trees as well. Frost can definitely be a great startup spec in tier 4. For leveling, it's amazing, and getting stuck into early level endgame. Very importantly too, mages get Ice Block baseline as of a later patch in TBC. On top of this, when you use Ice Block, now you get a debuff called Hypothermia, preventing another one from being used for 30 seconds, which is more of a PvP thing, but I just thought I'd mention it here. The back-to-back blocks are gone. The Cold Snap talent has been moved down to where Ice Block used to be, and you get a new spell called Icy Veins, which in its final iteration in TBC is 20% spell haste and immunity to spell pushback, making this a great new DPS cooldown for all mage specs. And yes, Cold Snap does reset its cooldown. This was a real game changer for mage PvE DPS back in TBC, and made Frost into much more of an appealing support tree for Arcane and Fire. Here's an example tree getting started, and Frost in its own right isn't half bad, you know. This is a bit more of a greedy spec though. If people hear Frost, they're very likely going to be expecting at least an improved Blizzard. New talents like Arctic Winds, Empowered Frostbolt, and the end of talent tree, Water Elemental, being a very powerful 45-second duration summon, which you probably largely associate with PvP, but its damage on its own isn't half bad either. Make sure you make a simple macro for the freeze as well, so you can get a ranged Frost Nova. There's also a more mana efficiency focused fire spec for early game content, which brings tons of AoE, Blast Wave, Dragon's Breath, Flame Strike, Arcane Explosion. The mage gets a massive AoE toolkit, though it is pretty mana hungry and it's missing Icy Veins to keep up on single target. Though with tier 4, Dungeon Spam and Kara, the spec will put up some respectable damage for all that AoE you're going to be encountering. Which brings us to Arcane that I've been hyping up so far. Let's pull a tree up straight away. We're getting all the beefy buffs from this tree, such as Arcane Potency, Mind Mastery, and Spell Power. We then have our set of cooldowns being Arcane Power, Icy Veins, a reset for Icy Veins through Cold Snap, stack up a Trinket and a Heroism, and I think you see where this is going. This spec, however, is entirely reliant on you having the tier 5 2-set bonus, which grants Arcane Blast, a bonus 20% damage and mana cost. When Arcane Blast is cast, it's actually stacking up a debuff on you that goes to 3 times, a max stack costing an extra 225% mana, but it reduces its spellcast time down by up to a second, so 1.5 seconds baseline. Arcane Power on top of this is another 30% extra mana cost. That is one expensive spell for a class with a limited mana pool, and the Mage can't keep this level of DPS blasting up without some help. On longer fights you can play a more conservative rotation of 3 Arcane Blasts, and then just Frostbolt till the debuff drops and then 3 more and repeat the cycle. On shorter fights though, and fights just maybe a lot shorter than expected in TBC, this could be a real contender for top DPS from the moments mages can get their hands on the tier 5-2 set. However, and this is the caveat, you must be willing to commit resources to the mage. You can't just stack arcane mages like you can with other classes, because they'll just run themselves at in no time at all. They will want to be grouped with a shadow priest to benefit from vampiric touch. They will want your druid to innovate ideally. You want to swap in a resto shaman to the group to drop a mana tide when the time is right, and of course your own mana potions and mana gems as personal consumables. I'd keep an eye on arcanes once tier 5's out. I think they're going to be a real top performer in shorter fights. And just to give it a mention, your end of tree ability, slow. It's actually really powerful, combining a casting move speed and ranged attack slow. Unfortunately, it just doesn't really tend to see much play in practice, being dispellable. Which leaves us with Fire, the DPS spec you know and love from Classic. First things first, rolling Ignite is dead. Each mage gets their own Ignite debuff, so no more building the bonfires, I'm afraid. The good news for TBC though is if you like firing off them balls, the spec still does great. It needs a bit more gear to really get going though, but by tier 5 and especially with the tier 6-4 set, this spec can do some very respectable damage, whilst not needing all the extra attention arcanes do to really get results. Looking at our talents again, we see that Icy Veins is being taken for that extra DPS cooldown. We don't have the points to spare to get that reset on Cold Snap though. This spec also allows you to bring Permafrost and Improved Blizzard, which could be helpful on locking down AoE packs in certain encounters. It's some great utility that shouldn't be overlooked. This spec will get better the deeper we go into the expansion. You no longer have world buffs to really pump up and cheat out more crit chance than you should have had. I suppose that's the story for Fire Mages for many expansions to come though. Other than that, the spec is very similar to what you play in Classic. Keep Improved Scorch up and Fire away. New talents include things like playing with fire, Pyromaniac, and a decent little execute type effect from Molten Fury. I suppose I should mention Empowered Fireball too. Pretty much every spec in the game has something along this line at the bottom of the tree, just so they scale as you get more gear. I know it's a very impactful thing, it's just everyone has it and it's not really the most exciting to constantly point out. So that's enough on PvE. I'd say they aren't half bad, you know, and if you are a mage at the moment, I'd start being extra nice to your druids for that innovate. It'll pay off, trust me. Which means it's time to talk PvP. Mage is such an unbelievably stacked class when it comes to household PvP names from back in the day. Your Vertni, Genking, No One. Mages make up part of the holy trinity of the Rogue Mage Priest, one of the most consistently high rated arena comps, well, ever, to be honest. And this comp has more or less always seen some play just because of the level of synergy between the classes. But before we get into the serious business frost stuff, how about Pyro though? This is some homebrew spec I just popped together. It's pretty similar to what works in Classic, but now we have even bigger crits thanks to spell power, as well as being able to fit more talents in. That should increase your burst a little more. Let's just say when people aren't running much resilience in Season 1, the meme may see some play after all. Frost, though, is what you will be seeing the vast majority of the time when it comes to mages in PvP. Like the other mage specs we've looked at, this one is also a little bit flexible, with points being moved around with preference, that being in the arcane tree to make sure those polys and CS are hitting, or for more resists for the mage. There's also some wiggle room in the frost tree on Winter's Chill and Arctic Winds, as you prefer really. What's the deal with Improved Blizzard though? We're trying to PvP, not do a Mara 1 pull here. Well, and it works like this in Classic too, by the way. For some reason, this isn't a magic debuff, so it's more or less a guaranteed slow, and Blast Wave works like that too, as far as I know. That's just a feature of the game, I guess. In a later patch in TBC, and this was an across-the-board change made to hard CC, Polymorph was cut down to a 10-second duration max, and of course it's still subject to diminishing returns, where it would last half as long upon recast, so you can't polymorph someone for about 1 minute anymore. thankfully. But mages gained even more cooldowns into their already cooldown heavy base kit to make them sort of like a caster equivalent of a rogue. Icy Veins, Ice Block, Ice Barrier, Water Elemental, and then they can reset everything they do with a Cold Snap, a class that can absolutely pile on a ton of pressure through their instant cast, now including Freeze from the Water Elemental, Ice Lance for bigger shatter combos, and don't forget spell stealing valuable buffs either like Heroism or Wings, or the polymorph openers from invisibility letting you engage more or less on your terms. I would expect to see a lot of mages at high ranks in all arena brackets, but you do most frequently see them alongside rogues and or priests, be them disc or shadow. The only real downside they have is that they have a mana bar, though with their ability to kite and CC opponents, they can often find space to drink. So let's finish up on some tier sets. Tier 4, the Aldor Regalia. The 2 set, no more knockback when casting Frostbolt or Fireball. In PvE, hopefully you shouldn't ever be in a position where this overly matters, maybe it has some niche uses. The 4 set, a shorter cooldown on a couple of your spells, it's okay I guess. Tier 5, the Tirisfal Regalia. The 2 set, as we have talked about, enables a whole new playstyle to emerge, so it depends whether or not you want to go arcane as to how much you care about this. The 4 set is a solid spell damage proc on crits, should have decent uptime if you are blasting away, as arcane does. Tier 6, the Tempest Regalia. The 2 set is another tick on evocation. I should have mentioned this one earlier I suppose. It's now 60% mana, no longer affected by spirit, so you don't need to weapon swap before you do it anymore. Still, it's decent on longer fights. The 4 set is 5% more damage on a few of your main spells, mostly for fire. I don't know why Blizzard decided to try and go back to making arcane missiles relevant again though. The 4 set is a really nice bonus once you start hitting other tier 6 gear as well though. So there is a little recap on mages in TBC, but is it enough to answer? Mage, is it any better now? Well, I think the best way I can put it is as the expansion goes on, they get better. You start off at a loss in power compared to Classic overall, and that's kind of to be expected. I've called the Mage Classic's unintentional hero class before, so hey, it's about time it happened. Paladins replace you as the best AoE farmers or boosters, and there are a lot more mages currently played in Classic than I suspect there will be a demand for, and not every single mage will be able to go full arcane and pump after tier 5 opens. As a pure damage class and whose real selling point is their damage, you just aren't offering as much as others do. What I'm saying is, get a raid spot in a guild sooner rather than later. Oh, and for PvP though, yes, they actually somehow do improve and get better than they already are. Frost is just fantastic. And today we meet Blizzard's answer to the question, how can we justify adding a class with shamanistic powers to the Alliance? The answer of course was the Dwarves. After the summoning of Ragnaros, the binding or creating of elementals within BRD, they seem the natural fit for the- wait, they're Dark Iron Dwarves? Yes, but they're different. Oh, okay, sure if you say so. So what did Blizzard come up with then? Well, the second most obvious choice, have a race of space goats crash their spaceship into Azeroth and then have Prophet Velen do some Prophet Vision stuff that came out as, hey, the Alliance look like our type, let's go make friends with them. I read the lore for this, you know, honest. Finally, the faction-only class was gone, never to be returned. Yet. By late game of vanilla, it's easy to see how the grass looked greener on the other side. Holy Palders started to become unoomable healing machines, and Ellie Shamans were perhaps one of the most lethal PvP combatants before Resilience came out. And of course, for a huge amount of players, they had only ever faced these two quote-unquote new classes, never having played alongside them or got a real feel of how they played firsthand. And there was a huge surge and, quite frankly, a demand for both Shamans and Paladins to fill raid spots for their excellent utility for both the Reds and the Blues. Today though, the focus is on the Shaman. If you want an easy raid spot in TBC, not just on Alliance, on Horde 2, Shaman is arguably going to be the highest demand class bar none. This goes for all three specializations too, though Restoration more so than others, that's for sure. So with 3 specs to cover and plenty to talk about, let's get started, shall we? So, what's new? Baseline, of course, then we'll get into the spec-specific stuff after. Well, without a doubt, the biggest, most important, impactful, and noticeable change for Shamans from Classic to TBC is that they are no longer shown as pink on the UI by default. It just looks plain wrong. They get their true deep blue colours. New totems are in, those being the Fire and Earth Elemental totems. As the name suggests, they are summoned from the totems themselves, and if said totem dies or is replaced, so does the elemental, so use with care as they pack a 10-minute cooldown. They're also guardians, not pets. This means you do not control them directly, so they may just have the tendency to decide that a mob 20 yards in the distance has looked at them the wrong way and they need to pop on over there and give them a bash on the head, so use with caution if in any way they could risk a chain pull, or just be ready to replace or recall a totem. The Earthen Boy is more tanky, taunts, does some minor damage to the target, and they're also nature immune. The fire provides a small reflect shield for the Shaman and the Elemental, Fire Nova and a Fire Blast, though is quite liable to ooming itself very quickly. This will be your go-to Elemental in most cases where you need that extra DPS, and of course, it's immune to fire effects. Speaking more about totems, we have two new main changes that have been made. A new Ur totem with a focus that the Shaman will be part of a spellcaster group in mind, Wrath of Ur, adding a very solid extra amount of spell damage to your whole group, as well as a huge quality of life change, Totemic Call. Over the expansions, Blizzard have tried so many iterations of how do we allow shamans to move their totems about easily. I guess this is the first try. It instantly destroys all your totems, refunding 25% of the mana cost. It goes without saying that the wipe you've no doubt experienced on the Horde when Dog randomly gets pulled from out of nowhere in Molten Core, when a whole flock of Whelplings appear midway through your Broodlord fight, or when a dozen trash mobs decide to join you for the Hygen encounter, you get the idea. But yeah, there really is no excuse now. This allows much easier movement of totems, and a lot faster too. A new elemental shield was added, Water Shield, giving a very nice passive mana per 5 tool with a proc to restore some mana when hit. This all but replaces Lightning Shield in near all areas of content, bar a few. It's even free to cast. And finally, the big one, the reason why on top of all the already great utility shamans offer, the reason you're going to be seeing so many of them, this noise right here. Heroism or Bloodlust. So in TBC they are a little bit different from retail. Whilst they do the same thing for both factions, 30% haste for 40 seconds, I guess Blizzard wanted to keep a little something faction specific for each of the new race class combos, coming in the form of the sound, animations and the name. The differences back then were it's a party-wide buff, not raid-wide, and you can swap party members during combat, so Shaman in your more min-max guild will be rotated into the highest DPS group to maintain a permanent uptime on heroism, and they can do this because on top of being able to move characters, there is no debuff like sated or exhaustion after having benefited from this effect. Also, you can use it in arena. I think this could be an area that may attract some criticism as we go into TBC, because getting heroism is just, well, it's fun for any class, role or spec. Having that taken away so your warlocks and hunters can dominate the meters even harder is something I can see being frowned upon, and there are a number of extremely easy fixes like not allowing groups to swap in combat or adding a debuff to it. Either way though, I just thought I should let you know about that. Leveling then, as always we'll keep it short here. Mana efficiency for DPS specs is considerably better now compared to Classic, meaning generally speaking there's just a lot less downtime. Another positive is gearing in TBC is just, well, a whole lot better. In Classic it often felt a bit of a struggle to actually find male quality gear that had the stats you wanted as either DPS spec. Quest actually gives some of these now, and I say some because yes, you're still going to have plenty of leather gear as enhancement or cloth as elemental, but at least your gear is giving more relevant stats than a random pile of intellect, stamina and spirit and you're just trying to make do. You'll probably still be enhancement 2 for leveling until decent greens or blues start appearing on the auction house, which in time can make elemental a bit more attractive of an option. Dual crafting on top of this gives a lot of new great rings and necks at all level values, which should be something else to aid out your performance. On to PvE then. This is where the Shaman really shines. Like we started off with, you want a raid spot, you want to think about Shaman. So in Classic they are a bit all over the place. You see plenty of restoration, less elemental and very few enhancement generally speaking. In TBC it's good news across the board. While still not really a meter topping DPS class, what Shamans offer is just too big to ignore in any of their roles. Let's start with what is, in my opinion, the most improved out of the 3 specs, enhancement. So for enhancement, or actually just Shamans in general, they're a class they just have so many good talents in each tree that it's often too difficult of a choice to branch out into the other trees for extra support, rather than just cramming nearly all of your points into the main tree because you kind of have to. Here's a ballpark kind of enhancement specialization you will see in PvE. Changes with the spec include the threat generation from rock biter weapon is gone, it's just flat bonus damage now. The tanky talents are still there, though if enhancement tanks were rare in Classic, they're going to be next to non-existent in TBC, as Blizzard guided them much more towards their intended role, now having decided what that would be. The big new highlight for this tree is talents that make sure you don't go in about 30 seconds, including Shamanistic Focus, Mental Agility and Shamanistic Rage, your end of talent tree ability, which also packs a solid 30% DR on top. I guess the big change here is that it's time to hang up the two-hander and become a dual-wield lightning god. Is two-hand enhanced totally dead though? In PvE, yeah, basically is, yeah. A number of talents really benefit from dual wielding, such as the updated Storm Strike, as well as the fact you can have a Wind Fury on both your main and offhand weapon now. You also get 9% melee hits solely through talents as shown here, which is pretty incredible and streamlines your gearing a nice bit. The real selling point for enhancement and why your raid will always want one is Unleashed Rage, essentially a permanent 10% increase to your party's attack power. Goes without saying as to why this is so good. There's also just a lot more going for the spec in general now than there was in Classic. You've still got Totem Twisting, Storm Strike can actually be used as the debuff cap is raised, as we will be using Flame Shock as another debuff. Your mana management is overall also much better, and though those big meaty hits from the two-hander are gone, it's replaced with a much more fluid and fast-paced feeling playstyle. So from one DPS spec to the next, just like enhancement, Elemental has come a long way. Much as has been the case with the previous, far better mana efficiency now and can put out some very respectable damage early on into the expansion, but does not scale as well as other casters do. Here's an idea of what you may be looking at for Ellie. Elemental Focus gets a little rework to save much more mana, giving a spell discount guaranteed after a spell crit is landed, and believe me, Ellies are going to be spamming crits hard. More mana gained from Unrelenting Storm. No, it's only got 3 points in here, it's just a result of having so many mandatory feeling talents. If struggling, you may wish to take points out from extra spell range and put them here instead. The threat modifier from Earth Shock has been moved to Frost Shock, keep that in mind. And if you thought Enhancement got a lot of free hit, well with this build you're packing 9% hit baseline. Drain Eye Shaman get an extra 1% for free through the racial. And then you have Totem of Wrath, your end of talent tree ability, which gives a further 3, so you're looking at a possible 13% spell hit for Elemental before any gear. Speaking of Totem of Wrath, this is the big selling point for Ellie. 3% more crit and hit is huge for your caster group. Note that it is a fire totem though, so the fire elemental is going to be sitting on the bench for most of the raid content. Finally, Lightning Overload. I like to think of this as Wind Fury for spells, an extra chance to fire off a duplicate spell, but with a damage penalty and no threat. This is where you can really fly up on the meters early on with some good RNG during cooldowns, and at least you can say as a shaman, you always know you're going to be getting heroism. Which leaves us with Restoration. Here's something along the lines of what you will be looking at. The build depends on what kind of group you're going to be in, of course. If you're not in a melee group, you don't need these extra totem talents in the enhancement tree, and you can just put more points into Restoration instead. When it comes to Restoration, if you've been playing it in Classic, I can safely say you know most of what's up in TBC. I'd like to introduce you to your new best friend. They're called Chain Heal. Chain Heal is, yeah, it's really good. It gets even better now through talents as well. You've got Earth Shield, which is a solid upkeep buff. Remember to keep it on your tanks or a fellow caster or healer who could benefit from the spell knockback protection in some cases. For real though, raids often have multiple Restoration Shamans because they are so strong, and they bring heroism of course once again. If it's anything to go by how constantly high the demand is for Restoration Shamans on the Horde side in Classic at the moment, I think we can take that by 2 and that's what it's going to look like in TBC. In fact, I'd say Restoration Shaman will be the most desired spec class combo in the entire game. So then, PvE wise, we are looking in a very strong position overall. Is it the same story in PvP? No, not entirely, no. So you may have noticed in the videos so far, I haven't talked about 5 versus 5 in arenas at all. They do exist in TBC, they're even a good way to cap out your points for the week, but in terms of a frequently run competitive format, no, I don't expect them to be that. The 5s bracket was totally removed at the start of Legion and it went quietly into the night. For the longest time it's been considered a more for fun mode rather than something competitive, and I bet the number of 5s starting in TBC compared to 2s or 3s would just be such a massive difference. You can still get titles and gear from it though, so I've no doubt they will still be run. But why is Shaman the first time I'm choosing to bring up 5s in Arena? Well, let's have a look at Elemental in PvP as a case in point. You may have noticed so far with basically every other class that's very highly represented in Arena PvP is they can do all the stuff their class is good at doing instantly. Rogues, Warlocks, even Frost Mages to an extent. For Elemental to do damage, it needs to cast. And casting with a rogue in your face and pillars is a big problem. Now, early in TBC with next to no resilience, I bet they could find a good few run it down burst comps, but as the expansion goes on, they're gonna start to really fall off. Here is an example spec, pretty much packing all the talents possible into burst and praying to the RNG gods that lightning overload procs when it needs to. Even still, resilience reducing damage from crits will start to hurt builds like this. Did I mention if Shamans get interrupted on nature, they can only cast Flame or Frost Shock? What made this spec so great in Classic is there was pretty much zero burst protection whatsoever, as well as most PvP encounters being open battlefields, and both of those are being taken away from Elemental now. Also, Elemental Mastery just gets straight up nerfed in 2.3 and you can no longer batch Chain Lightning and Earth Shock. The spec is definitely solid in 5s though, bringing that standard Shaman group-wide utility, and there's just more players on the field, so the chance you'll actually be able to play the game is much higher. So does Enhancement fare any better? Yes, I'm happy to say it does. It's not without its issues like, having a mana bar, being vulnerable to being kited, having to choose between a slow or an interrupt through shocks, they don't have any hard CC, at least it can get some things done. Talents like the updated toughness and improved Ghost Wolf help on the mobility side. You're still very reliant on Wind Fury procs to really put out damage consistently though. Like other Shaman specs, it's best to be on the offensive through Purge, grounding totems and shocks to keep the pressure up. Is two-handed enhancement totally dead in PvP as well then? Actually, it can have its place, as can using a shield. You aren't just running around dual wielding all day. Two-handers can be really good for when you finally reach that Frost Mage and land one attack before he kites you for another 30 seconds, and shields can come in very handy when you're starting to get focused by melee and just waiting for peels or for your healer to be available. But much like with PvE, most of the time in PvP, you're going to be seeing Restoration Shamans. Here's an idea spec for you. If I have to describe Resto Shamans, I'd say they are fair. They have very clear strengths and weaknesses, and unlike the previous two specs, Restos are actually seen in a few high-level comps consistently. Retribution Paladin and Resto Shaman in 2s can be a real lethal combo, with their combined class synergy stacking up very well, or equally well in freeze comps with double melee cleaves like Ret Arms Resto. Wind Fury Totem is huge. They can make appearances in caster cleaves. Remember, Hero works in Arena, so a Frost Mage with Icy Veins up and Hero is going to have under 1 second polycast and just overall extremely high pressure openers. Strength-wise for the Resto Sham, Purge to keep pressure up, giving huge buffs to teammates through their utility. When you're in Ghost Wolf, you count as a beast, it's instant cast, so you can immune Sap, Grounding Totem and interrupt with Earth Shock, very strong heals. So what are the weaknesses? You see, about those very strong heals, you need to cast them. They don't have a very good instant cast healing toolkit, and one interrupt totally cripples the entire class. You're relying on Earth Shield, Nature's Guardian procs, Nature's Swiftness, that's only once every 3 minutes though. Especially at lower gear levels, it's really easy to just get zerged down in a matter of seconds. You need good peels, the ability to juke interrupts, and just generally to be able to outplay and stay cool under pressure. You could say as much for any healer, but I really think this goes doubly for the Shaman. Also, if you ever find yourself playing versus a Warlock and you do not have a Curse Dispel on your team, you're going to have a permanent Curse of Tongues running on you, and that is going to make your life so miserable. For melee cleaves, that is quite the problem, and is another reason you need to apply the pressure and aim to end the game fast. Overall though, the arena representations for Shaman go something like Resto, Enhance, Elemental, and overall it doesn't have as easy a time as seeing high rating that other classes do, but it's still very possible. So let's finish up with some tier gear. Tier 4, Enhancement. The 2 set, 12 additional strength from totems, so that sounds like something you get from a level 25 green item. The 4 set, 30 more damage on Stormstrike. I mean, I get Blizzard wanted to buff the hybrid DPS classes, but they didn't exactly go overboard with this, did they? Restoration, 3 MP5. 3. The 4 set, smaller cooldown on Nature's Swiftness, that's actually not bad. Elemental, 20 spell damage, that's a bit more reasonable than the other 2 we've seen so far, and a chance on crit to reduce the mana cost of next spell. Not bad, mana can still be a concern early on. Tier 5 Enhancement, 2 set gives you a chance to get an instant cast lesser healing wave. That's pretty solid actually, if nothing else to cast in the moment, it helps with your survivability a little bit. It's something. The 4 set is 5% more haste from your flurry proc. Really nice actually, most of your damage will still be coming from auto attacks, so this is a big help. Restoration, smaller cost on lesser healing wave, not the best, you shouldn't really be casting this too much. The 4 set a decent reduction on healing wave after getting a crit from another heal. It would be good, but it's once per minute, so not so much. Elemental, like enhancement, better off heals, but you still have to cast them on the 2 set. As for the 4, it's like a reverse tier 5 mana refunds instead of reductions now. Tier 6 enhancement, 2 set mana cost reductions, mana shouldn't be as much of an issue anymore for you. The 4 set some attack power after Storm Strike hits, albeit a relatively small amount. Resto though, here we go, now this is a tier set. The 2 set 10% cost reduction on chain heal, 4 set 5% more heals on chain heal. This is what you want to see, really powerful. Resto Shamans are going to be seeing a lot of use out of that chain heal button in TBC. Elemental, again, pretty nice, rather thematic 2 set, giving you some extra bonuses when you have all your totems up. They made something akin to this in actual talent in Legion as well, I believe, which I thought was really cool. The 4 set, more damage on your main spell, love to see it. Also, this set looks absolutely amazing, which means it's that time again. After having covered a good deal of how the Shaman has changed and how it looks in the new TBC landscape, can we give the answer to the Shaman? Is it any better now? In PvE, hugely better, enormously. Whilst you were already happy seeing Resto Shamans in Classic, you can now add Enhancement and Elemental to that list. Although places will be more limited for the DPS slots, they should experience a much better quality of gameplay throughout the expansion. On the PvP side, Elemental takes a fall as we progress, there's no real two ways about it, whilst Enhancement and especially Restoration continue to grow and I would say both improve moving from Classic. Today through the Dark Portal is the most popular class in Classic by far, and I mean by far. When it comes to all-around performance in PvP and especially PvE, there is quite literally no better choice than the warrior?
The warrior class.
Yes, that. Out of a possible 8 classes to pick for each faction at the moment, the raiding population on nearly every single server is 20% warrior. Ults included, of course, but yeah, the class is pretty good. Best tank, best DPS, scales exceptionally well, really fun to play with a constant flow of rage and ability spam. Who doesn't like seeing themselves at the top of the meters after all? So does this trend carry over to TBC? Well, not exactly, no. Warrior was really brought much more in line. That doesn't, however, mean they go from being literally the best at everything they can do to the worst. Far from it. It's just their legacy of dominance was taken back quite a few steps, and deservedly so I would say, since when does one class get to be the best for an entire duration of a game in an MMO? Well, normal MMOs anyway, Classic is a bit of a special case. And just a side note for the class, you really can make of it what you want. Back when I was doing the Was It Any Good Though videos, I'd say some classes were not so good on performance, and I would have people in the comments saying, but wait, back in my day, I was always top DPS on my Boomkin doing my ZG pugs. I mean, that says a lot about the pugs, but yeah, if that's good enough for you, then fine. I'm just trying to give a good impression of what you can expect from the class. After all, people like to perform well. That's why the top 2 play classes on almost every server are Warrior, Mage at the moment. With that said, let's get into this. What's new for the Warrior then? Lots of new additions to utility, that's what. Rage generation was changed a bit. As far as I know, this should be correct for 2.43. I couldn't really find any more information on the subject. Actual normalization of rage gain wasn't a thing till Kata, by the way. I've seen that commented quite a few times. Also, the heroic strike queuing should still be working too, also not removed till Cataclysm, as heroic strike was made an instant attack then, not a next melee attack. A new shout was added, Commanding Shout, gives your party a bunch of extra health. It's either this or Battle Shout, by the way, so make sure you keep the right one up. Victory Rush was also a thing in TBC. It doesn't heal like it does in later expansions though, but it doesn't have any rage cost, so a free bit of extra damage whilst leveling, or to get resets in PvE. It's something, I guess. Intervene was another addition. You may be noticing a trend here. Not much new on the damage front, is there? It's like charge or intercept, but for an ally, redirecting the next melee or ranged attack. Only usable in defensive stance. Pretty solid, can be good in PvE to get back in range of an enemy when someone decides they want to run away from the tank, instead of towards them when they get aggro, you know who you are. And is a very high skill cap ability in PvP, which can hard counter some CC setups. Speaking about PvP, Spell Reflection. something to keep you alive against those pesky mages, well, perhaps for one additional global. It's a good ability, kind of easily telegraphed though, as the warrior has to put on the sword and board to use it. In PvE, it gives you a button to press against casters, though some harder hitting effects from bosses will just prevent the damage but not actually reflect the spell, unfortunately. Finally, whilst not a new active ability, it's pretty good, so I'll give it a mention. That is Stance Mastery. So you know how without Tactical Mastery, changing stances feels completely terrible as your rage is reset to 0? The Prot Fury players at the moment will know. Either way, with this new passive, you get to keep 10 rage when you change stance. Pretty good. Tactical Mastery still exists too, and stacks with this, though it's been downgraded from 25 rage kept to 15. Leveling then. I'll tell you what, I thought leveling as a warrior was going to be terrible in Classic. And to be honest, the early levels kind of felt like you're role-playing a level 15 NPC that has about one meaningful ability, but once you get through some levels, you pick up Sweeping Strikes, Whirlwind, Mortal Strike. The class really comes alive, and it's a lot of fun. Admittedly, I did level as much as I could with world buffs, and even in TBC, they will still work up to level 63, though I wouldn't really expect Oni to be getting reset or dropped multiple times a day anymore as people move onto the new content, or, you know, just boost past the whole thing. But with Victory Rush, more readily available gear through early quests, especially weapons, I reckon it won't be quite as painful as it's been made out to be. Oh, also stock up on bandages and potions, the usual for warriors really. Also, whatever you hear about warriors, their AoE is very good, for a melee class at least. They will be strong in dungeon content or where their ability to cleave will come in, such as Kara or ZA. Right then, on to PvE. This is where things get interesting for the warrior. So in Classic, they are number 1, and they have been from the moment the servers launch till whenever we go through the Dark Portal, and there are a number of reasons for that, some of which go away with TBC. Out of every class, warriors get the most benefit from world buffs. As a DPS and to a lesser extent a tank that is dependent on dealing crits to generate rage, being able to get crit chance for free through world buffs was a pretty big deal. They had good baseline scaling through strength and agility, the latest version of Bloodthirst, 2 huge DPS cooldowns in Death Wish and Recklessness, heroic strike queuing, and well, just the rage mechanic in general. More gear, more damage, more crits, more rage, more pumping. The class just scales so well. And TBC is sort of the start of what warriors would go on to see for, well, quite a few expansions to come. It's similar to what Fire Mages experience. When you have a class that needs to crit to really put out damage, and then you take a lot of that crit away at the start of the expansion, it takes them a while to get going again. Also, itemization in TBC only really starts to throw melee a bone towards the later tiers when a lot of armor penetration items become available. Warriors don't even do that bad damage, to be honest. It's just smaller raid sides, more limited raid slots due to wanting a wide variety of specs for utility, particularly melee unfriendly mechanics in earlier tiers of raiding, which have now been confirmed to be pre-nerf. And the fact that warrior is way overrepresented in Classic at the moment. It doesn't exactly help their case that the one unique buff they can bring baseline to the raid is Commanding Shout. And that's just some extra health for your party. This will make warriors overall less of a desirable class to bring along than they are at the moment. And I don't want to scaremonger, of course, it depends on your raid. Content will be clearable with a suboptimal setup, I'm more than just a bit sure about that. And there is a lot more to raids than speed and efficiency, I get it. It's just, you shouldn't expect to be the guy who is always at the top of the meters anymore. Well, not for a long time anyway. So let's talk specializations. Fury first. Here we are then. And there's a lot of talents, and this goes for warrior DPS in general, which aren't exactly the most exciting, and you kind of have to pick them up in the arms tree to get down to Deep Wounds and Impale, which are just too good to pass up. It kind of feels like 10 points wasted just to get what you really want. So many other classes moved away from this kind of design. In fact, it almost feels like warrior is the only class that actually still has to do this. You'll notice Death Wish and Sweeping Strikes have swapped places, which never really made a lot of sense, to be honest. Both of these fit thematically much better in their prior places in my opinion. Tactical Mastery has moved from arms and now is at the top of the protection tree, but we're a bit short on talent points to be able to pick that up. In the Fury tree, new additions are Weapon Mastery, improved Whirlwind, and improved Berserker Stance. At least warriors get some additional threat reduction mechanic now. Bottom of the tree is Rampage, use it after a crit and it gives 250 bonus attack power at 5 stacks. Good early on, but it doesn't scale really, which is a shame. And I didn't manage to find this referenced anywhere, but is it ever worth with late game gear just dropping this and picking up Death Wish instead? 20% more damage for 30 seconds still sounds pretty nice. Maybe fights are long enough to where it's not worth it though, just a thought. And I would personally also take Piercing Howl, I just like the ability. Another new addition for Fury for the Whirlwind ability is you attack with both your main and offhand weapons now. And speaking of cleave, Sweeping Strikes is moved up from 5 attacks to 10, so you can see why their AoE is still pretty solid. Expect Fury to be a cleaving machine in dungeons and 10-man content, though it won't come into its stride in terms of single target damage as it does at the moment in Classic for quite some time. Though there is another spec Warriors will be running in PvE content too, and I'd bet this one will be more frequently seen. And the reason for that is it does bring a unique benefit for the entire raid, and that is Arms Warriors. I can't help feel like Arms was designed to be the PvP spec for the expansion, but one little talent near the bottom of the tree made it into the PvE spec as well, which is nice, I guess, some variance. You get to swing around a big sword, you get to see big crits, and everybody gets Wind Fury, so it looks like a pretty fun spec actually. Until you hear, and you may or may not be happy about this one, but you're going to be using Slam. Yep, that ability that's casted forces you to stand still and doesn't really fit with how melee classes feel in WoW. Well, that's how I see it at least. Here's our talents. Notably, Slam is reduced by a full 1 second now, a big reason towards its new viability. Going as far into Fury as we can for some talent points into Flurry, more attack speed is always great. Over in the arms tree, it's pretty similar to Classic really. New additions are improved disciplines, more rec uptime, love to see it. Getting Mortal Strike of course, that will be used in between slams. And the big addition, I suppose, is Blood Frenzy. This should be permanently up from your crits on deep wounds, 4% more physical damage for the entire raid, which is very good. Your hunters will love it. You'll also note we have Death Wish and Sweeping Strikes here, and unlike Fury, you do have a big meaty two-hander and are fully benefiting from those 10 cleaved attacks. Add a rec on top of that and warriors can really put out massive burst cleave. This is kind of their niche speciality now actually. At the bottom of the arms tree is Endless Rage, just a flat 25% more rage from damage dealt, which is pretty nice, keeps the resources going very well. It just tends to be the extra talents over in the Fury tree edge it out. And I know I haven't really gone over this for other classes, but professions are also worth a quick mention for the warrior when it comes to DPS. More specifically, that blacksmithing is really good. Makes sense, a warrior would want this profession, right? Reason being is we really want to be able to guarantee that we can get our hands on a very good two-handed sword. And the one I'm referring to is the Lionheart sword, which is upgradable as the expansion progresses and will pretty much always be a solid choice till later phases. And this needs you to not only be a blacksmith, but further spec into swordsmithing. Depends how much you like to min-max, but this is a choice you'll have to make against hammersmithing, which rewards an even more well-known weapon that will save for PvP. Which leaves us with Protection, the go-to tank for Classic. Come TBC, they now have some competition on their hands. Both Burrs and Paladins really step up to the table. Does the Protection tank lose their spot then? No, not at all. Prot remains a very strong choice, especially as a main tank. Which is good because, kind of like Paladins, if you aren't actively tanking something, you're not exactly contributing the most, shall we say. I suppose I should mention Prot Fury as well, the go-to tanking style for guilds that really want to push performance. Is it still a thing in TBC? Well, it's not supposed to be, and the content is pre-nerf, but I don't want to be never say never about this. At the end of the day, Prot Fury only ever existed in Classic due to the threat meter game between the tank and the DPS. It just generates the most threat, and if you can reliably survive whilst doing that, of course it's the best thing to do. Warglaive Prot Fury? Maybe? Just a little speculation. Also, Prot Fury is a much better off-tank, and Tactical Mastery was updated to add a threat modifier to Bloodthirst as well. I think though, and this is the general consensus on the subject, tanks will actually be deep protection, as they should be, wearing their heavy mitigation gear and a big old shield, the real warrior tank class fantasy. And speaking about content being pre-nerf, this is actually great news for Protection Warrior tanks. What warriors have that druids and paladins can only dream of is an actually strong defensive toolkit beyond look at how high my health bar is, those being both a last stand and of course shield wall. Here are our talents, so this is more utility or defense oriented as far as Prot goes. One warrior somewhere in the raid really wants to pick up improved Demo Shout and Thunderclap. It can be any of them really, it just fits into Prot a little bit easier I think. Oh, and Thunderclap can be used in defensive stance too now, which is a great little quality of life change. Arms and Fury talents are pretty much the same as in Classic. In Protection we have improved Sunder and Focus Rage, making your abilities much more spammable, improved Shield Wall, Shield Mastery, and improved Defensive Stance. I guess this whole tree will feel kind of new to you if you've been Fury Prot though. Shield Slam is a big threat generator, and it also dispels a magic effect as well. At the bottom of the tree we have Devastate, which is like an upgraded Sunder armor that now does a bit of stacking damage. There is a lot of CC in this tree as well, with Concussive Blow and maybe even improved Shield Bash if you wanted to pick that up as well for dungeons. Paladins and Druids do have the scaling edge on warriors for tanking, but you will still see many prot warrior tanks as a safe and stable choice in the role. Also, there are some boss mechanics that really feel as though they were made with the warrior in mind. Think Illidan's sheer ability in Black Temple. So I hope that gives you a broad outline of warriors in PvE, because I want to move on and talk PvP. To start off with, similar to other tank specializations, prot is not a thing in PvP, it just doesn't do any damage. Fury also isn't really either, well, partly it is for some key talents, but you're not going to be full on dual wielding. What warriors will be in TBC is arms, the same as it's been in Classic really. The Iron Will talent has moved over from Protection, which is a nice 15% chance to resist some additional effects. This will stack up very nicely with the Orc Ratio, which has now been nerfed down from 25 to 15% by the way. Tactical Mastery and Protection is taken, combined with your passive, that's 25 rage when swapping stances. In the arms tree we have Second Wind. This is a really good new talent and will do far more over the course of a game than you would think. At least you're getting some rage whilst you're sitting in a Nova or a Root these days. Improved Hamstring is taken again, and in Fury there is Weapon Mastery, which reduces the duration of disarms against you by 50%. Weapon chains are nerfed in general by the way, you can no longer be completely immune to them. Even the ones made through blacksmithing are still just 50%, but the real benefit of this specialization is to be able to get sweeping strikes, which obviously if you're hitting two targets next to each other is just going to be an enormous amount of pressure. Alternatively, there is another build for arms. We go really deep into it and pick up Endless Rage at the bottom. This also allows you to get improved Intercept, which stacks up nicely with the PvP 4 set, leaving you with a 20-second cooldown on Intercept, which is really solid. PvP wise is where you consider hammersmithing instead of swordsmithing for Deep Thunder, which should be available from launch, and then in phase 2, Storm, or more commonly known, Stun Herald. It's just got a ton of stats, a very good proc that can single-handedly swing games. Also it's 3.8 speed, whilst the PvP alternative weapons are 3.6, and for arms, slower is always better. Your abilities scale off your weapon's base damage. This is why you would also consider Mace Spec, which is yet another stun on its own diminishing returns and also generates you a little bit of rage. Or you can just go Sword, get a Shaman in your group and pray for Wind Fury RNG. Arms in TBC is kind of like Classic, they're not really up to much solo, but with some adequate support they can turn into a force to be reckoned with in all arena brackets. Not forgetting Mortal Strike of course, this is really the big selling point of the warrior I would say. The easiest to apply 50% healing reduction effect. This makes warriors a very high pressure class when given uptime, with some strong capabilities if you crit, and sometimes some very good CC. Maces are a bit RNG heavy. Warriors are most commonly seen with Druids in 2s and with Lock Druid in 3s, though they do fit into quite a wide variety of comps, and whilst they can see some longer games compared to other classes, they are a real mainstay in PvP content for TBC. So let's finish up on some tier sets. The big news is now both DPS and tanking specs get a separate set, which is really nice. Tier 4, the Warbringer armor, 200 absorb after parry, and it also has a reasonably good proc chance. In TBC, however, you still don't generate rage when damage is absorbed, or dealt for that matter. Perhaps it is worth when enough things are hitting you. The 4 set is 10% more damage after a revenge hit. It's okay once again, warrior threat generation is more about ability usage rather than dealing damage, but it helps. For DPS, 2 set Whirlwind 5 less rage, and 4 set 2 more rage after one of your attacks is dodged or parried. So yeah, not bad actually, both are doing things for your damage, which is a positive. Tier 5, Destroyer armor. Protection, when you get hit by the first attack after shield blocking, it has a whole lot more block value. This is the same as the Protection Paladin set if I remember right. Seems kind of niche again. The 4 set a chance for 200 haste rating after being hit, a pretty good proc chance too. Haste is a solid stat for protection, more attacks, more heroic strike spam, seems pretty good actually. DPS wise, Overpower gives 100 AP for 5 seconds on the 2 set, which yeah, you aren't going to be leaving Berserker stance even as arms, it just loses you too much rage to swap back and forth. The 4 set some rage cost reductions, once again it's okay. Tier 6, the Onslaught Armor. Protection, 170 more health from Commanding Shout, well I guess it's better than nothing, not by much though. The 4 set 10% more damage on Shield Slam, which is just okay again. DPS wise it's kind of similar to the other tiers. Less rage cost, more damage, I mean it's fine, it's not the most exciting but it's functional. So there is a quick look at the warrior and the evolution of the class through the Dark Portal, but can we answer? The warrior, is it any better now? Well no, not really. Compared to Classic at least, you've been playing literally the best tank and DPS by some margin. If the class got any better, they would have been on par with Wrath of the Lich King released Death Knights or Ret Paladins. No one class should remain that broken for that long. Blizzard kinda had to bring them back in line, which they did. Tanking is still as good as ever as it was for protection. They do kind of similar to how they do in PvP compared to Classic, in that they need some help to be good, though resilience goes a long way to stop you from getting globaled. DPS is where the big hit happened. You aren't going to be on top of the meters every single fight of every single raid for the whole expansion. Yes, they have great AoE for a melee. Yes, by tier 6 with more armor pen gear becoming available, they do really start to improve, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a downgrade from Classic. Though whilst warriors don't pack the utility others do, the raw damage output is solid and by the end of the expansion is actually very good. Still, less competition for gear though, right? That's something. It could be like bringing a new Druid to Molten Core at the moment and walking them out with full tier 1. All the same as we went over earlier, the class is just way overrepresented in Classic at the moment. I'd be looking at securing a guild spot sooner rather than later on the warrior, regardless of your current role or playstyle preference. It depends how you approach raiding of course, not everybody's sweating at the thought of passes, and that's fine, you do you. There we go then, that's the warrior. I think they get a worse reputation than they deserve. We will see exactly how the pre-nerf content with modifications will look like in TBC. It could mean dungeons and raids full of 360-degree cleaving, AoE stun spamming, incapacitating mobs, which isn't great for melee full stop, or maybe those are the kind of things that they would like to tone down a bit. The final healer to go on the list and the go-to healer throughout the whole of Classic. Versatile, powerful and a staple of any raid, but as I'm sure you know they are much more than just a heal bot. Their DPS counterpart spec providing excellent raid-wide utility, which only improved considerably in TBC. Today, we take a look at the Priest. Despite having two identities between heal and DPS, you often had a real tough choice, trying to forge your path as a damage dealer and were pushed to heal through perceived viability, raid performance, and especially through tier sets, majority of which only catered to making your heals better. And as we've seen so far with many other classes that supported a hybrid playstyle, Blizzard brought in many a change to assure you that a raid spot would have your name on it. And for a raid in TBC not to have a Shadow Priest is really unthinkable. So then, let's make a start on this, shall we? What's new? Let's start with the Priest racial abilities, because they still exist in TBC and some of them do change, as well as having new additions for both of the new races, which both support the Priest class. First of all, the big news is now all priests will have Fear Ward. Up until a later patch, it was only Draenei and Dwarves that had it. However, now it's on a 3-minute cooldown instead of 30 seconds. In place of Fear Ward, Draenei and Dwarves get Chastise, a 2-second instant cast immobilize effect on a 30-second cooldown, and it's pretty good in PvP actually. Both racials change for Night Elves. Illune's Grace is no longer dodge, instead it's just a chance for hit against melee and ranged attacks. 20% at that, not bad. And Star Shards is no longer completely useless, it's now instant cast instead of channeled. Still doesn't benefit from Vampiric Touch or Embrace unfortunately, it doesn't do shadow damage. Blood Elves got Touch of Weakness, the same as what Undead have at the moment, and a new ability called Consume Magic, which dispels one magic effect off you for around 500 or so mana, and it can only dispel priest abilities. In PvE, it sounds like you're probably just going to snipe off your Divine Spirit or Powerword Fortitude for some mana. Could be decent in PvP, a little down rank, Renew or Touch of Weakness for free mana gains really. And Draenei on top of Chastise have Symbol of Hope, which is instant cast around 1000 mana over 15 seconds for your entire party, which is actually pretty amazing. Should be castable in shadow form, sort of like how Powerword Shield is because it's a discipline tree ability, making Draenei look like the ultimate mana battery. No other of the existing racials change from vanilla. New ability wise, we have Mass Dispel, famous for its use in PvP to remove Divine Shield and Ice Block. Other than that, it tends to have niche use, removing up to 10 negative effects from friendlies and 10 positives from enemies. Binding Heal, which is kind of rarely used, it's like a flash heal that affects you as well as the target, with a bit of a mana discount on it. Prayer of Mending, I've always really liked this spell. I think it's something about the sound when it just bounces all over the place. A heal that jumps between targets when they take damage up to 5 times. Super mana efficient if the heal will proc all 5 times, or even twice for that matter. It's great in PvP and PvE. Shadow Word Death, again a PvP playmaking ability. Instant cast, hits pretty hard, and if the target lives, you take the same damage back that you dealt. Whilst it sounds like a pure negative, priests in PvE are already self-healing a lot through Vampiric Embrace, and in PvP this damage backfiring can be used to break CCs if it's predicted, such as Polymorph or Blind. Last of all, we have Shadow Fiend. If the mana bar does run low, pop this little guy to restore it back up again. It has really high avoidance and spell resist baseline, so isn't likely to be picked off by some random AoE, does shadow damage too, and just restores a whole lot of mana. Leveling wise, priests were already extremely strong in Classic due to their mana efficiency, but they really had to lean on their wanding for, well, pretty much the whole of Classic really. It wasn't exactly the most thrilling level experience, but the whole feel of never needing to stop was such a carry. Now in TBC they get a little spell at the bottom of their shadow tree called Vampiric Touch, which we will be talking about in a lot more detail for PvE, but suffice to say this puts more than just a bit more punch into your damage and mana efficiency. Whilst the wand will still be your best friend at lower levels or with less gear, it'll fall out of fashion over time as you naturally just get used to keeping that mana bar healthy through Spirit Tap whilst whittling opponents down with dots. It's worth a mention that 1/3 of your bonus healing is converted into spell damage in TBC, so even if you are holy at the moment, the Shadows playstyle will still be there for you. Also, all that bonus spirit will go a long way to making sure you never really go unless you're extra keen and you want to pick up some of those tier 2.5 tokens. That could be a good idea at the moment as well, or just go the dungeon route and stick to holy or discipline. Both those specs will work as well as ever for leveling as part of a group. Not too much other to say than that. I do like to keep this part quite short. Experiment with the class a bit during this time, see what works for you. Right then, PvE. I'd like to start with where I think the majority of the priest player base will be at the moment. I sound like I'm doing the Paladin video again here, don't I? And that is on the healing side. So Holy and Discipline were both amazing in Classic. You really can't go wrong picking a priest if you want to heal. Do they keep that power level in TBC then? Yes they do. However, they aren't so far and away in power level anymore. What they do keep is their versatility. There is no environment where your holy priest will not be useful. And if we are talking overall utility per healer, they don't quite match up to a shaman, no one does, but they can still be there on throughput, most of all when they're spec'd into focusing on their group-wide healing through spells like Prayer of or Circle of Healing, and even Prayer of Mending, while still also being a solid tank healer with greater heal spam. Down ranking is still a thing in TBC, and priests will need to do this to balance their mana pool with stop casting macros, because as fights get longer, your mana can struggle if you spam too much. So here is a talent tree for the big heals focused priest. Now if you played a priest in Classic, it's a bit like looking in a mirror because there aren't a huge amount of things that are new. Inspiration is still great with your new AoE spells. Holy Reach is taken much for the same reason. Holy Concentration, I'm starting to see a trend in these talent names, is like clear casting for heals, letting you fire off a big greater heal when it procs. Spirit of Redemption is taken because free 5% spirit. Lightwell unfortunately still cancels its heal when you take damage. Empowered heals at the bottom for some scaling, and finally Circle of Healing, which is like a weaker Prayer of Healing, but it's instant cast, spammable, and really strong on throughput, but very mana intensive. Also note it heals the target and their group. You will probably also want an improved Divine Spirit Priest. Here's what it will look like. It's quite similar to the last spec, but just going far enough to pick up this talent. Make sure Divine Spirit increase your target spell damage and healing by 10% of their spirit. Their spirit, remember, not yours as the healer. Of course, not every class, healer or DPS really cares that much about spirit. Priests and Druid healers are stacking spirit, and DPS wise we've got Shadow Priests, Boomies, and to a lesser extent Mages who have some spirit on their gear. So it can be a nice amount of free stats for a few classes. It stacks up very well with the human racial as well, which is now 10%. But the spec that really comes a long way in TBC is Shadow. Now, I've always liked Shadow Priests. Nothing to do with me maining a lock at all. Obligatory mention that the debuff cap was raised from 16 to 40, so you can actually press all of your buttons and not overly worry about pushing other beneficial effects off the target. Changes wise, the threat modifier on Mind Blast has gone, thankfully. Shadow Vulnerability is nerfed down to 10% at max stacks. However, Shadow Priests bring a new talent called Misery that makes the target take another 5% bonus spell damage, so it's overall unchanged really. Shadow Power is in to make your 2 spells that can crit a bit more often, and no, unfortunately, dots and channeled effects still do not crit or benefit from haste. Focus Mind for some mana saves, and the big new addition is Vampiric Touch, a new reasonably hard hitting damage over time that converts 5% of all shadow damage you deal into mana for you and your entire party. This is Shadow's big selling point, the reason why Shadow Priests became known as mana batteries, and the reason now I realise why I always got into pugs so easily back during TBC. This ability single-handedly solves your mana issues whilst also providing thousands of mana back to your party members over the course of an encounter. It's this spell that will always find Shadow Priests a place with the healers or arcane mages of your group. So yes, you won't be in the group with the Boomies or the Elementals for the free stats, but to be honest, you gain very little benefit from crit anyway, so it's not really a huge loss. Shadow Priests do fine enough early on damage-wise, as dots are just good at the start of the game, but their lack of ability to scale beyond spell damage really hurts them, so expect to have more and more people overtake you as the expansion goes on. The Shadow Priest isn't there to top DPS meters, but they carry the raid in other ways, and unlike many other more utility-focused classes, some raids may even take 2 Shadow Priests because they offer that much for free through their really good toolkit. If you like Shadow Priest in Classic, well, now your raid is gonna like you a whole lot more in the Burning Crusade. Moving on to PvP then, an area of the game where priests in Classic have been also very strong. Shadow particularly in smaller skirmishes where they can take advantage of their dots and self-heals and shields, and Discipline for more group-oriented PvP supporting their allies with their strong dispels and instant cast toolkit. And moving forward through the Dark Portal to TBC, they are still looking in great shape. Since we were just talking about Shadow for PvE, we'll have a look at Discipline first of all. For PvP, I'd expect Priest to be the healer you see the most after Druid, or perhaps even a similar amount in the early seasons if many players decide to move forwards, with the Priest as their main character. The class spec combo of Priest and Discipline is just really stacked when it comes to sheer utility and healing power. It also gets a huge boost from Resilience, as in Classic, whilst Priest can do a lot, the chance you get deleted when a geared melee stuns you for even a few seconds is quite high. Now thanks to Resilience taking less damage from crits, less chance to be crit amongst other things, Priests can really start to shine. Here is our specialization, picking up Martyrdom for guaranteed spell knockback immunity after receiving a crit, as well as a chance to resist interrupts. Improved mana burn now reduces the cast time by 1 second. Focus Power, Mass Dispel is a 1.5 second cast baseline. This takes it down to 0.5, as well as giving you a nice amount of hit for when you are on the offense, which will be very often on the Priest. Reflective Shield does decent damage, and Focus Will really stops the Priest from falling over under pressure at max stacks, being 12% reduced damage and 30% bonus healing, which is pretty amazing. Power Infusion has changed from 20% bonus spell damage to 20% casting speed and mana cost reduction for 15 seconds. And at the bottom of the tree we have Pain Suppression, 40% reduced damage and a 65% chance to resist dispels for 8 seconds. This is your big cooldown to put a stop to all ins. With other talents you pick up in your tree, you'll be around 75% chance to resist dispel effects. So whilst not immune, you would have to get unlucky, which at some point no doubt you will, but the actual effect of pain suppression is magic itself, so at some point you're going to roll a dice and lose. Over in the Holy Tree we have Holy Nova because we need to get those rogues and druids out of stealth, Divine Fury to aid your offensive capabilities, and 1 point in Blessed Recovery for another magic trash debuff to cover more important ones. And much like the Druid, which we're seeing a real trend with here on good PvP healers, is the vast majority of the Priest kit is instant cast. Dispel Magic, Prayer of Mending, Renew, Power Word Shield, Power Infusion, Pain Suppression, Psychic Scream. Only for them to really do DPS do they need to hard cast. It's also worth a mention they are the only healer to pack an offensive and defensive dispel that can remove 2 magical effects either way. This ability alone on any healer would push them into being a more competitive choice, but it's landed on a class where they're already really good. Discipline is seen in all brackets at high ratings, in 2s most often with Rogue, Mage or Hunter, and 3s forming the final part of the holy trinity of Rogue, Mage, Priest. However, there is another priest spec that you will still be seeing in Arena, less frequently, and no, it's not holy, that's not really a thing. Shadow, however, Shadow is. Straight into a spec then, because it's not all too different from PvE to be honest. We have improved Psychic Scream and Silence which are taken. The PvP gloves work nicely alongside these new talents. Silence is extra good in TBC as for some reason silence effects are both not on diminishing returns and untrinketable, hence why you'll see comps like Shadow and Mage so often, which is 9 seconds of point and click, healer can't play the game. Shadow doesn't pack the durability that Discipline does due to its lack of cooldowns, but it can put out some huge damage in its own right. Shadow vulnerability quickly builds up strong dispel protection on your main target when combined with your Shadow of Pain, Misery and Vampiric Touch. So despite Shadow not having any built-in offensive dispel protection, it kind of resolves that issue by itself. Other than that, it's kind of like the Shadow Priest you know at the moment. You can't have that assurance that Vampiric Touch will always be up though, so they're still liable to ooming pretty fast, even more so when they have to play defensive, though they do have Shadow Fiend to restore some mana of course. Pray for blackout procs and go all in, that's your Shadow Priest. They are often seen with Rogue or Mage in 2s, Rogue Mage Shadow Priest in 3s, or even with Resto Sham Mage Shadow Priest in 3s, amongst other various comps. Let's finish up checking some tier gear out. Tier 4, the Incarnate Regalia. Shadow, a bit more stats and duration on your Shadow Fiend. It shouldn't really be dying anyways, but you'll get a bit of extra mana out of it. The 4 set a bit more damage, which will scale up alongside Vampiric Touch, so that's something. Holy 2 set, Prayer of Healing, applies a weak heal over time. The 4 set a stacking cast speed reduction on Greater Heal from Flash Heal up to 0.5 seconds, so not too big of a deal. Tier 5, the Avatar Regalia. The 2 set is a different way to save some mana, so okay. The 4 set is up to 100 bonus spell damage on next cast after a Shadow Herb Pain tick. I guess you could use it to snapshot your dots alongside other trinkets. Healer wise, the 2 set, if Greater Heal tops off a target, you get 100 mana back. Obviously you don't want every single heal to be over healing, which is how I read it, but it's a small benefit if you are down ranking though. The 4 set is a bit more Renew, which is decent. Tier 6, the Absolution Regalia. 2 set for Shadow, more Shadow Herb Pain, and the 4 set is more Mind Blast damage. Pretty good overall, at least both tier bonuses are going towards direct damage now, and direct damage means more mana from Vampiric Touch. Healer spec 2 set is reduced cast on Prayer of Healing, which will be good when it's good if that makes too much sense. Even still, it is an expensive spell to be spamming. The 4 set is more heal on Greater Healing. Now this is actually really good, especially when you are on tank heal duty or they're just taking a lot of damage. I feel like although there is a lot to the Priest, I've managed to go through everything I wanted to relatively quickly. Maybe it's just the Priest in TBC still feels quite familiar to me compared to Classic. Aside from the big gameplay changes of course, the utility on Shadow and how Disc has been more focused into just being a PvP spec now. I suppose we should try and answer though, the Priest, is it any better now? Across the board it's almost a full yes. I'd say Shadow improves the most to becoming fully playable in PvE content and still a strong pick in Arena. I'd expect some strong contenders from Priests vying for the Shadow spots in good raids at the moment though. Healer wise in PvE, I'd say compared to Classic they aren't quite the full on overall package that they were. In terms of utility, Shaman really knocks them off that top spot. Not to say they perform poorly at all, far from it. It's just you have some competition now, and that is usually a good thing. The time of the purples is finally here. Warlocks historically in WoW have been pretty much always up there in terms of performance in all areas of the game, with Classic as the only real version where they have struggled a little bit, well, at least in the early to mid-game period of it. If two big things have changed to make Locke's life better, and this really does go for every class, but there is much more readily available hit gear distributed out in TBC now, as well as being able to pick a lot of it up through the new profession, dual crafting. On top of this, the debuff cap is raised to 40, so you can even play Deep Affliction and be able to fully dot up your target without too much concern that you'll be pushing other valuable debuffs off. Oh, and they just scale exceptionally well too as the expansion goes on, so let's make a start on this. What's new then? Quite a bit, especially more utility or convenience to focus spells. Remember soul shards from Classic? Yeah, they're still a thing. Some of your more powerful spells or demon summons will need them. And as somebody who's played a lot throughout the whole of Classic, to be honest, they were rarely ever too much of an inconvenience. You just sort of get used to needing them for various things. Also, it's worth a mention that summoning stones outside of instances can actually be used to, well, summon people now, which is a really nice change, so you don't always need a lock. Speaking of summoning, Ritual of Summoning gets some updates in a later patch. In fact, on the launch of TBC, you couldn't summon in Netherstorm at all, as Netherstorm's chaotic energies make summoning magically impossible. Wow, big lore gameplay. You can also summon inside of instances, again as of a later patch, providing the target meets the requirements like having the correct heroic key or being attuned to the raid. Ritual of Souls was added in TBC, works kind of like a summoning portal. You need 2 other players to click, and then it will provide 10 master level Hellstones. Much better than having to individually make 10 of them and trade them out as you currently have to in Classic. Saves a lot of shards and a lot of time. When this spell was first added, it took 5 minutes to summon the Soul Well too. I guess Blizzard didn't want it to be too convenient, did they? Thankfully, it was changed down to 3 seconds in a later patch. Incinerate is a new destruction spell. It does comparable damage to Shadow Bolt with an immolate on the target. I'm assuming this was supposed to open up destruction as a real fire damage dealing tree, and as we will see later, that didn't really take off for a number of reasons, though fire locks may still see some play at times. Fel Armor, a different type of active armor buff to maintain, which all but replaces demon armor more or less all of the time really. It provides bonus spell damage and healing received, as well as being upgradable through talents. It's just a lot of stats for free. The bonus heals stack up very well in PvP, or even whilst tanking on certain bosses too. Soul Shatter is the new "Oh no" button for Warlocks in PvE, mostly for destruction, an instant 50% threat reduction for more or less anything on your screen. Needs a shard to use though and has a pretty big 5-minute cooldown. Though threat should already be less of a concern due to Salvation being available for both factions and a 10% further threat reduction from the Destructive Reach talent. Though if you are spamming your AoE, you can easily overtake any tank if they aren't blasting on threat, which is done through Seed of Corruption. Your new best friend in AoE, fires off a debuff that when the target takes a certain amount of damage, including damage dealt by friendlies, will explode for heavy AoE damage. It doesn't apply corruption to everything either, that came in a later version of the game. Meaning that this is spammable and it hits really hard, and unlike current Warlock AoE, and one of the big reasons this spell is so good is that it can crit as it's not considered a periodic or channeled effect. This ability takes Warlocks single-handedly from kind of okay on AoE to in most circumstances the best, even more so than Mages. Leveling wise, Warlocks in Classic were pretty good. Now in TBC they are more or less just an improved version of that. Now I've leveled 2 Warlocks to 60 because I rather like the class, and for me I thought the best way to go was some variation of Drain Tank using Succubus as a pet and balancing your health and mana pool. For the Burning Crusade, I reckon that Demonology looks to be quite a bit more of an attractive option than it does in Classic, thanks to certain talents being just overall improved or new ones added. Also, we get the Felguard at the end of the tree, a beefier, harder hitting and just, well, overall an upgrade on the Voidwalker. You can even have some variation of SL by as early as level 61, but you are missing quite a few key talents. Also, your demons gain a percentage of your stats too, so they scale up with you, just making them overall more useful. But we're starting to cross over into talking about talents a bit here, which I like to cover in PvE. Suffice to say, for leveling, there's a number of options really. I always just encourage people to play around with the class, try out some different talents and see what they think of it. I can see myself starting out as Demonology. But speaking of PvE, let's get into that. And we're going to start it off with Demonology. because it's not just only a leveling spec. At lower gear levels in the expansion, it should be playable in raids and dungeons. It's worth opening up with a special mention to an item from Classic, the Black Book. Drops off Razor Gore and BWL, shouldn't be too hard to pick up. In TBC, it's changed to look like this instead, noticeably now working on the Felguard, giving him 325 attack power, which ain't half bad. I guess we should talk about what's new with this demon and why he's such a great addition to the somewhat unwilling team. He's got a taunt, so yep, turn that one off in dungeons. He's got intercept, which works exactly how the warrior one does, and it has a minimum range on it, so good demo locks will have a stay command for their pet, so they'll actually be able to stun targets off you. There's a cleave for some, well, cleave damage, and Demonic Frenzy, a stacking attack speed buff, so you'll want this to be at max stacks before you hit him with a Black Book. Also, and this one goes for all pets and demons, is Avoidance, a passive 50% chance to avoid AoE, which was added so pets can do stuff in PvE without just dying to random damage. Good luck all the same convincing your healers to actually heal your demon though. Here is a talent tree that may come in early game. New features are in such as Mana Feed, Demonic Knowledge, Resilience, and Tactics. They really had a field day naming these talents, didn't they? Of course, we have Felguard at the bottom of the tree. Soul Link has changed a little bit. In Classic, it was 30% damage reduction and 3% damage. Now it's 20% damage reduction and 5% damage. You get as many talents as you can in Destruction to keep improved Shadow Bolt rolling. The reason you have 1 point in Corruption is 1, you don't really have any to spare, and 2, if you reduced it anymore, you'd still be on GCD, so it's kind of pointless to put more than 1 point unless you can fully talent it. Also, Fire and Spellstones now go in the 1 slot instead of the offhand, so free wand if you don't have one that you would otherwise use, and they keep the effects of bonus fire damage or a self magic dispel, which can be quite good in some cases. There is also a more late game variant where you can pick up Ruin for bigger shadow bolts using Succubus as your main demon, but this demon is such a liability, it's barely more tanky than an imp, and it doesn't look like you can pick up Master Summoner either, so if the suck dies, so does your damage, not because of the damage she's putting out, but the 15% extra you get from having her active. So you're gonna need some solid pet management and healers who heal pets, and yeah, I'm just not overly too sold on this over just going deep destruction once you've got gear and pressing the damage bolt. I think demo will be fun early on though. Next spec then, Affliction. It's kind of in a similar place to Demonology, however, it brings raid-wide utility on top of that. It's good early as it's not so reliant on gear. Here's what a build may look like. And now that the debuff cap has been raised, Warlocks can actually use their damage over time effect, so the free 10% hit you get in this talent tree is really helpful at low gear levels. Of course, in TBC, damage over time still doesn't crit or gain any benefits from spell haste. They only scale with your spell damage, but their flat damage early on is pretty solid, not DPS topping, but good. Well, on single target at least. If you're hitting multiple enemies that will live for a while, they are really good. New additions are an updated and much better improved Drained Soul. This is actually worth picking up for leveling now as well. Empowered Corruption for better scaling. Shadow's Embrace is a 5% physical damage reduction on the target. If a boss is hitting hard or considered a threat, this is a pretty big deal. We also have Malediction, which is 3% more bonus damage from your Curse of Elements. And in a later patch, Curse of Elements and Shadows are just combined together into one button, which means Talented, 13% more damage taken from pretty much all spell damage sources, which is pretty good. You still get improved Imp too, as well as Healthstone, so for a damage dealer, you are helping out the tanks quite a bit. Whether this level of support will be required for any bosses, or you just want another deep Destro, yeah, that remains to be seen. Just like with Demo, there is a later game version which just picks up Ruin again for bigger Shadow Bolts. Again, this will depend whether you value the utility of this spec or a class that can just do more damage. We've got Contagion near the bottom of the tree, 5% more damage to a few of your dots, including Seed of Corruption, which already hits like a truck. And of course, Unstable Affliction hits hard if dispelled in PvP, hits the healer back really hard, and puts a nasty 5-second silence on them too. You also want to keep this spell up all the time in PvE if you are Deep Affliction. But what you should expect to see, especially once people start getting those juicy crafted sets, or for certain by tier 5, are a lot of Destruction Warlocks. So once you have your hands on a good amount of hit and crit gear, it'll be time to make the swap to something like this. And honestly, there isn't all that much different from how it is in Classic. There's some threat reduction on destructive reach, backdraft for the occasional free shadow bolts and a bit of extra crit. We've got things like nether protection and soul leech which are taken here, but if the defensive stats aren't needed, you can easily just put these points into improved immolate instead. And just like with Classic for destruction, you're looking to go into demonology to get demonic sacrifice for that 15% bonus shadow damage. Then at the bottom of the destruction tree we have Shadow of Flame, which adds a lot of scaling to your big main spells. And finally, Shadow Fury, which isn't really taken for PvE since it would be that or choosing Demonic Sacrifice, which isn't really a choice. It does do some damage on top of the stun though, more for PvP. As for the playstyle of Destruction, it's definitely quite a bit less involved than the other two, where you are tracking your demon and your dot timers. For this you press Shadow Bolt until the red bars on your screen have gone. That's pretty much it. You may have noticed that all the fire related talents are being missed out on here. So what's the deal with that then? Is fire destruction just not a thing at all? Well, it has a few issues, though I'm not going to 100% say you will never see it, but it should be way less common because Demonic Sacrifice really forces you to pick one type of damage, as do certain items like Shadow Weave or Spellfire. AoE damage wise, whilst you'll be able to get more out of Hellfire if you're going into a Fire Warlock style of play, it doesn't in any way match up to the damage you can get from Cedar Corruption. Shadow Bolt just has better base scaling than Incinerate does, and the big one, improved Shadow Bolt. This makes it so the more locks you stack, the better it gets basically. It does cap out eventually, but it's almost like you can consider it being a permanent uptime on a flat 20% increased shadow damage taken against the main target, which is just enormous. And whilst fire would be able to get improved Scorch, which would be 15% guaranteed bonus damage against the target, it doesn't quite compete. Improved Shadow Bolt will also be nice for your Shadow Priests, as they're only going to be consuming a stack through Mind Blast. So whilst Warlocks aren't exactly the most exciting specialization wise, it makes up for it with massive crits and being among the top 2 DPS classes consistently throughout the expansion. Also, the AoE Lock Spring, if they can just spam cast, is number 1. Extremely powerful spec overall. Expects to see a lot of people who like being up there near the top of the meters to be considering the Warlock for PvE. On top of that, Warlocks are more than just great DPS. On a number of encounters, they are actually tanked, such as Leotheris in Serpentshrine Cavern, Capernian in Tempest Keep, Illidan in Black Temple, and Alethes in Sunwell Plateau. That is quite a bit of tanking, majority of which needs the Warlock to have farmed out resist sets, mainly from badge vendors. Bar Alethes, where you just stack stamina instead. Talent wise, like many things, it'll depend on the content difficulty. The Warlock has an easy plus 70 spell resist to all just from getting Master Demonologist with a Fell Hunter out, on top of a flat 20% damage reduction from Soul Link, and then just spam away on Searing Pain, and that's your tanking. And I've managed to get by so far without ever needing to change specs for the likes of Twin Emperors in Classic, and just putting on as much shadow resist as I can since the start of AQ40. But TBC is tuned up quite a bit more baseline compared to Classic, so I guess at the worst you hearth out and go respec to make the raid easier for everybody. And I've always quite liked tanking things. I think it's interesting and it breaks up the usual gameplay a bit. So then, for PvE, the class is versatile. It has a number of different viable specs throughout the expansion, is one of the top single target DPS and the best on AoE. So that's already looking in a pretty good place. Is PvP a similar story then? Amazingly, yes it is. Locks get without a doubt one of the most obnoxious PvP specs to have ever existed in the game. But before we get onto that, I feel like I have to give a mention to Destruction, because it's the only time where you will really see the full talent tree being used, with talents like Nether Protection, Soul Leech, Backdraft, and of course a Shadow Fury into strong burst spell damage combos. An example spec like this is definitely more for fun in Battlegrounds, as the reason you rarely see people play this is without Soul Link, Warlocks are just really squishy, and you need to actually cast to get things done, which is never a good thing. On top of not being able to pick up Fell Domination in Arena unless you sacrifice damage, which is a tough choice to make. As with every class and spec, I bet we'll see some people aiming high with Destruction, maybe in comps that aim to apply a lot of pressure early, possibly with a Shaman for heroism, we'll see. But the majority of the time, like the vast majority of the time, you will see SL, Siphon Life, Soul Link. There is a deep affliction variation you do see at high ranks sometimes, playing unstable affliction to apply a huge amount of pressures against healer, but like deep destruction you're pretty liable to just get trained down. Here is SL. SL, there is some variation on preference here, but this is just a general idea. Most of the time you'll have a Fell Hunter out for that passive 70 resist to all schools of magic. Against melee cleave, swapping to a Void Walker is a viable tactic for another 10% passive physical damage reduction. Drain spells are now 30 yard baseline, up from 20, so 36 when talented, on top of the new talent Siphon Soul, making both drain spells hit pretty hard against targets with a number of dots running on them. 1 point in Shadow's Embrace is taken for additional dispel protection, and over in the demonology tree we have improved health funnel and demonic resilience to make your demon a bit more tankier. The lock is at heart still a real pet class, and good pet management is what will separate the good from the great, because on a base level, honestly, SLSL, and I say this as a Warlock enthusiast, is kind of like the WoW version of the noob tube, or picking the stealth archer in Skyrim, or getting the Drake sword at the start of Dark Souls. The skill floor to get good results is pressing 1, 2, 3 on your dots and then fear or draining. I reckon at lower ratings there's going to be a huge amount of things like Resto Druid Unlock, gatekeeping. At the high end of course there are absolutely plays to be made, such as Fell Domming out a second Fell Hunter for a blanket silence or an interrupt, keeping tabs on your pet to stop the opposing healer drinking, making the correct use of your Fell Hunters interrupt and dispel. In any event, I expect to see a lot of Warlock in PvP. If in Classic they were mushrooms, in TBC they definitely come out from their hiding place. Tier sets now. If I can say one thing about the locks in TBC, their tier sets are all amazing in the looks department. Tier 4, Voidheart Raiment. The 2 set is a very good proc for bonus damage when using either fire or shadow spells. You definitely want to get your tier 4 2 set to the locks. The 4 set is a bit more duration on 2 of your dots, which you're likely going to be using both of them in the early stages of the game, so not bad. Tier 5, the Corruptor Raiment. 2 sets, some solid healing for your pet. I actually like the sound of this for demonology, as healers really wouldn't have to focus on your demon anymore, but destruction will have probably taken the reins over by that point. The 4 set, if I understand it correctly, means that either of your main damage spells will increase the periodic damage of the corresponding dot for the remainder of the duration, and apparently when I was taking a look into it in a bit more detail, it stacks infinitely with the Everlasting Affliction talent in Wrath of the Lich King as well, so yeah, hang on to your Corruptor, maybe that'll be a bit of a thing then. Finally, Tier 6, the Malefic Raiment. Now this is a Warlock set, and of course the one that brings out the wings. The 2 set is pretty disappointing, to be honest, a very minor heal upon dot damage. The 4 set though, this is exceptionally good. Pretty much all locks will be full Shadow Bolt mode by this point in tier 6, and 6% more flat damage on your entire rotation is something you will want as a priority. So after having had a brief chat about the Warlock, the things they're good at and the other things they're good at, are we able to answer Warlock in TBC? Is it any better now? Surprise, surprise, it's a yes from me. It's probably overall the quote-unquote best class you can play. Locks are literally good at everything. Dungeons, PvP, PvE, single target, AoE. The class is great at farming, it's still a solid leveler, they start strong, and they just get better and better. So this of course means you should expect to see a huge amount of people looking to re-roll to this class, or just continue playing them. You know what that means, a lot of competition for gear, and maybe for raid spots. I think back pre-Classic that I thought this would have been the case with Fury Warriors, but with 40-man raids you can just fit so many DPS in there, there's pretty much always a demand for good geared Furies. With 25-mans you've already got a lot more utility focused specializations in there to boost up the raid's performance as a whole, so there will be a lot more of a limit as to how many people you can bring along just to blast on DPS, especially when you're in competition with another class for that top spot very often. Just something to think about, depends what kind of guild you intend to play in and how performance oriented they are. Through the Dark Portal today is a much talked about class for the expansion. It has a real reputation for high performance, mainly for one very special reason, and well, compared to Classic it really feels like a whole different beast. Today we have the Hunter. Let's get straight into it because the Hunter's toolkit was really done over and they were presented with plenty of quality of life changes. First up, we have a new selection of pets to tame throughout Outland as well as back during the old Classic content, including serpents, nether rays, warp stalkers, raptors, ravagers, dragonhawks, spore bats, and so on. Existing mechanics in vanilla such as pet happiness, loyalty, training points, feeding, and learning new pet skills are all still features in TBC. Even though the whole pet ability training thing never really made sense to me. Okay, Mr. Kitty. I had this other kitty about 5 minutes ago and I just abandoned him, but I saw him run really fast one time, so now I know how to teach you how to run really fast, so if you could just do that from now on, then that'd be great. Hunters also still need to carry ammo for their ranged weapon, and yes, it still takes up a bag slot. The dead zone will finally die, however, ranged attacks will still have a minimum range. So just for the sake of clarity, in Classic your ranged attack have a minimum range of 8 yards, Melee has a max range of 5 yards, so if somebody positions themselves in that 6 to 7 yard range, the hunter can only hit them with a very small selection of abilities that don't have a range requirement, like Scattershot. In TBC, your ranged attacks have a minimum range of 5 yards, so you will always be able to either melee or ranged a target, which makes an unbelievably huge difference to how smooth the class feels to play. I feel like this isn't really brought up, but it's actually one of my favourite changes to the class. Another big quality of life change is that traps can now be used in combat, freeing up Feign Death for other uses, though Freezing Trap does have a 2-second arm time before it will go off, and all traps still do share a cooldown. What doesn't share a cooldown anymore is Arcane Shot and Aim Shot. Arcane Shot still dispels one magic effect, also your magic based attacks like Explosive Trap or Serpent Sting gain some scaling from your ranged attack power. Finally, from the patch notes here, all pets will now receive a percentage of their master's armor, spell damage, spell resistances, attack power, and stamina, so your pet scales up as you get stronger. This is very important for the hunter. Oh, also all pets have avoidance, makes them even sturdier on boss encounters, unless you just get unlucky, I suppose. As for their new abilities, we have some really good ones to talk about. Aspect of the Viper was added to solve the hunter's mana problems in longer encounters, as well as improving their ability to stay in combat for prolonged periods of time in PvP immensely, as it restores mana depending on your intellect with bonuses at low mana. For PvE, you still want to keep Aspect of the Hawk up as much as possible for the ranged attack power and the talented bonus, but this is an option if mana runs low. A new trap was added, Snake Trap. Summon a bunch of snakes that rapidly apply poison debuffs to nearby targets. 50% effective mind-numbing and crippling, as well as stacking up deadly poison. Kind of niche use really. Fire traps are good for damage, ice traps are good for CC. Snake is somewhere in between, more on the utility side. Misdirection was added. Hunters always felt like a class leading the charge and pulling for many raid encounters in Classic, especially on Trash. And with this ability, Blizzard cemented them into that role. It only transfers threat from 3 attacks though to a friendly party member. Amazing tool for pulling and getting some good snap threat on a main tank, or mages and warlocks and encounters where they tank. Also very good for when a party member goes AFK for 2 minutes, comes back and finds themselves with a release spirit on their screen. Kill command was also brought into the game in TBC to give your pet something else to do. Activates after you crit to give your pet an extra attack with some bonus damage. This will be part of the rotation that we'll talk about soon. Steady Shot, the star of the show. As for your new abilities, you're going to be getting on a very familiar basis with this ability, let me tell you. Added to give hunters a button to press in between their multi-shot and aim shot, because otherwise all you did was just auto-attack really, and that was a bit boring, right? Steady Shot though, as it turned out, didn't just end up being an extra button to use in between those two other ones, it kinda replaced them. We'll save this for PvE though, because I want to quickly talk leveling. Well, to no one's surprise, hunters are still really good. Pretty much the trend with pet classes though, isn't it? Aspect of the Viper is super nice again during this phase of the game, which you pick up at level 64. You definitely want to head back to your faction capitals to get this as soon as you can. There are no class trainers in Shattrath by the way, so back to the old world you go. You'll be much more able to use your abilities often too as a result of this. In Classic it often feels like just send your pet in and auto attack away. Repeat, mana costs and worrying about taking aggro were too much of a thing. Your pet is getting some of your stats too, so it's tankier and it's hitting harder. And if I remember right from the pre-patch back in vanilla, BM hunters were just crazy OP, like they felt totally unfair to fight against. Tier 3 hunters are going to be literal gods early game, so in dungeons or solo you're going to be mowing down content like you're playing a later expansion decked out in heirlooms. Hunters in Classic leveling already feel like playing with cheat codes on compared to other classes. In TBC it's that, but with less downtime, so yeah, they're gonna be pretty great. PvE then, here we are. So you may know, but Hunters along with Warlocks are consistently top performers for the entire expansion when it comes to raw DPS. Hunters still have great utility in raids though through traps, misdirection, distracting shot and so on. Though they're great on the single target, Hunters aren't really going to be competing with locks or mages on AoE. Also, it's a pet class and your pet is gonna need to be alive and doing damage or your performance will suffer massively. So cue convincing the healers to put the pets on their bars and actually heal and rebuffing them. So with that little bit out of the way, let's talk Beast Mastery in a bit more detail. First up, Men Pet has changed to now be a heal over time instead of a channeled effect, which is great because, as we have mentioned before, we need to keep that pet alive. We get to pick up improved Men Pet 2, giving your pet a mini restorative potion effect. Less reliance on healers is always good in my opinion. Focus Fire for some nice extra damage, Animal Handler for some free hit for your pet, and faster mounts. Really solid. Serpent Swiftness, 20% attack speed for you and your pet, which is great at keeping Frenzy up, which we have 4 points taken in. Your pet, even with an 80% chance, should near have a permanent uptime on this buff. Your pet will also have the ability to train Cobra Reflexes as well for even more attack speed. Ferocious Inspiration is the big interest in this tree and a key talent to make BM so good. Again, if your pet's hitting a target, this should be practically permanently up through Frenzy, Kill Command, and your pet's attacks. The best thing about this though, it stacks with other hunters for some reason. Usually there will be 3 hunters with a Feral Druid and an Enhancement Shaman, so it's like a shared group-wide flat 9% damage buff, which is pretty good. We have Beast Within, 10% more damage, reduced mana costs, and immune to CC for 18 seconds. Another very solid talent to just improve your performance. In the Marksmanship tree, we have Rapid Killing that knocks 2 minutes off Rapid Fire. Doesn't quite line up with Bestial Wrath still, but it's still good. Focus Fire means your crits give your pet 50 focus for even more damage and more Frenzy procs. Your pet will be pretty much flooded with focus and spamming its abilities as soon as they come up. So I've mentioned pets quite a few times. Over in Classic there are a few choices, but your pet isn't really a big deal. It's often just too squishy to be doing any actual damage. For TBC, the main go-to pet will be the newly introduced Ravager. It's taken for reasons kind of like why Cat is at the moment, in that it has 2 focus stumps, those being Bite and also the new Gore, which has a chance to do double damage. Wind Serpents can be a consideration as well because they have a ranged attack, but usually it's Ravager all the way as they're just hitting more often, so more chance on uptime on those talents we went over. But that's Beast Mastery for you. Expect to see many a hunter playing this spec, and for it to be a constant DPS topper on single target encounters. There is another hunter spec I should mention too, Survival. This one is more utility focused, though will still do competitive damage. Here is our spec taking the bare basics in Survival to get the really important talent, which is at the bottom of the tree, Expose Weakness. A chance on range crit to increase the attack power of all attackers against the target by 25% of your agility. Bit wordy that. 2 talents should be fine once again, depending on your level of crit of course. Hunters though do have a lot of crit overall. Other good additions in this tree to help damage are Thrill of the Hunt for mana refunds, Survival Instincts, and a Lightning Reflexes talent that carries over from Classic. This spec is all about stacking agility to get the biggest debuff possible on the target. Over in the Marksmanship tree, instead of efficiency, you can take improved Hunter's Mark, which now works a little differently in TBC actually, now applying a baseline debuff of 110 ranged attack power up to 440 after 10 ranged attacks have landed, and the talent also confers that bonus to melee as well, so 440 attack power for free, way better than True Shot Aura would be for the whole raid, and it's much further up in the tree. It's no surprise that Marksman dropped out of fashion for PvE. At the bottom of the Survival tree we have Readiness, which is like the Hunter version of Cold Snap, or Preparation, but for all abilities instead. Not too often used unfortunately on the PvE side of things at least, only would really be useful for resetting Rapid Fire. Other talents just give better bonuses. That's Survival. As mentioned, more utility, still does damage, just less damage than BM. In part due to the spec, in part because you won't be getting the group with all the major buffs to increase performance. Which leaves Marksmanship left. However, for TBC, this spec moved much more towards focusing on the PvP side of things, and we've gone on for PvE for some time now, so I'd like to save it for that. On to PvP then. With the dead zone gone, better mana management, traps in combat, sounds like the hunters should be in a pretty great place, right? Well, kinda. Despite all these changes making the hunter's life much better, the new PvP format that really came into fashion was Arena, and Arena has these things called pillars, as well as a much more compact combat zone when compared to the open plan Battlegrounds or World PvP of Classic, which doesn't exactly favour a class that needs to be at least 5 yards away for most of its toolkit to work. The thing is, hunters do great damage when given uptime, it can just be kinda hard to pull off. What they're renowned for in TBC arenas are being part of drain comps, which does what it says on the tin. The win condition isn't burst or CC chains, though they can help. It's making the enemy healer or sometimes the DPS go whilst just surviving long enough for that to happen and keeping the pressure up. Despite all the new abilities and changes, the main one that the hunter brings is really Viper Sting, which drains a lot of mana over 8 seconds. This effect is reduced by resilience though. Your pet choice in Arena will most likely be the Scorpid. Why? They have a poison debuff that stacks up to 5 times, giving your mana drain some much needed dispel protection, and of course, keeping your pet alive is still a very big deal. But hunter games can tend to go long, like really long. TBC doesn't have dampening, only the shadow sight buff is active. I guess it's more of a acquired taste. Some people will like how hunters play out in Arena. Long games isn't exclusive to hunters though, there are other comps that often see this as well, but the nature of mana draining to win sort of encourages these drawn out encounters. Over in the talent tree here, it'll look something like this. Aim Shot now has a 50% reduced healing effect added to it, but it still is 2.5 second cast baseline. Scorpid Sting reduces chance to hit by 5% too now, instead of strength and agility. Improved stings is super important, more mana drain and dispel protection. Combat experience, careful aim and master marksman all add up for some nice scaling, and at the bottom of the tree is Silencing Shot. 3 seconds of silence does some damage, makes up for the hunter not having an interrupt somewhat. Hunters are often seen in 2s with Priest or Druid, or in 3s with Rogue Druid. Occasionally you even see double healer hunter, and I really don't envy the people playing against that. I wouldn't be surprised if we were to see a lot of Beast Mastery in the arena in early days too, before people have had a chance to build their resilient sets up. In fact, I bet there will just be a lot of burst oriented comps in general in Season 1 relatively soon after release. It should be a lot of fun, and it would look pretty much the same as the PvE build I reckon, maybe moving a few points around for defense. But yeah, you and your pet get 18 seconds of CC immunity, so that's plenty of time to go absolutely all in and just try and blow someone up. Add in a Shaman on top of that with a Heroism or Bloodlust, and I think you'll really be able to delete people. There's definitely a bit more to Hunter than most classes when it comes to PvP and TBC. It's a class where it's easy to look average, but the skilled ones will make it seem unfair, if that makes sense. Finishing up on some tier gear then. For once, the dungeon set is really worth a mention, and that is Beast Lord. The 2 set is kind of whatever, but the 4 set is essentially permanent uptime on 600 armor penetration. To put it in perspective, the entire of tier 6, which has 8 pieces, has about 650 armor pen total. Armor pen is a scarce stat early game, but it improves your DPS disproportionately compared to other stats you can get your hands on, and the fact that you can pick this up whilst leveling through dungeons makes it even better. This set will put hunters on top of the meters early game easily until they look to replace it some way into tier 5. You really want to be looking into this 4 set and considering getting those dungeons into your leveling. It will be worth the time investment. Tier 4 is the Demon Stalker armor set. Now I'm going to be honest, the 2 and 4 set are both practically useless. Unless there is something out in TBC found like Diamond Tribute where Feign Death Resist really matter, the bonuses just aren't doing anything for you really. It looks awesome though, I still use it on retail for my Hunter Transmog. Tier 5 Rift Stalker, this is more like it. The 2 set means your pet is going to have near permanent full health. Again, not having to worry about the healers paying attention and more or less knowing that your pet won't die is a valuable bonus even though it's not giving you direct damage. The 4 set makes Steady Shot better, amazing. Steady Shot and autos by this time will be your rotation more or less, more crit, very good. Tier 6 Gron Stalker armor, 2 set more mana gains from Aspect of the Viper, it's okay, good on longer encounters for sure. The 4 set is 10%, a whole 10% more damage on your Steady Shot. Wow, that's incredible. Hunter's Tier 6 Prio. Once you get this bonus, at least for PvE, you practically remove every other shot from your bar and just go full macro mode. There we go then, that's a little look through the Hunter and some of their changes moving from Classic to TBC. But can we answer the Hunter? Is it any better now? For PvE? Yes, hugely better. With scaling issues gone and the burden of world buffs removed, they really start to come out strong from the day of TBC to the Wrath pre-patch. Hunters that put in the time and effort will be one of the consistent highest performance in PvE content. For PvP, I'd say they do improve, it's just the format of PvP changed from big open spaces to arenas and pillars, and that doesn't suit the Hunter too well, though they can still do fine, it's just not going to be a playstyle for everyone. And that's your Hunter. Of course, just like the Warlock, expect a lot of competition for gear. If the amount of players who picked Warrior in Classic is in any way indicative of how many people will play the class that can top the meters, there are going to be thousands of rerolls going on, I'm sure.